Parents with nanny cams, what have you caught your babysitter doing? I house/dog sit for friends of my parents. The first time I did it, they mentioned they had a security camera by the front door that was motion activated, and I didn't really think anything of it. They were gone for a few weeks, they come home, their 2 giant huskies are happy, I get paid and all was well. A couple weeks later my mom calls me laughing. My parents had dinner with the friends I dog sit for, and they showed a video to my parents from the front door cam. Apparently all it showed was me sprinting full speed down the hallway, a dog toy in hand, biggest stupid grin on my face, followed by the 2 huskies running and sliding after me, followed by me, followed by the huskies. Over and over and over and over again. I sit for them as often as I can. Watched her outside playing with my dogs. She was dog sitting. Our yellow Labrador and golden retriever puppy started munching the blueberries right now off our blueberry bushes. They know damn well they are not supposed to get into the blueberry patch. We watched our dog sitter run over to them and try to get them to stop. She then ran inside and ran back out with a bowl. She proceeded to race the dogs for the blueberries. Had to be one of the highlights of our trip. We came home to a bowl of blueberries in the fridge and 2 very guilty puppers. I have cameras all over the inside and outside of my house. It's standard with a Ring doorbell. Next came critter cams I put near my bird feeders. Then cameras everywhere. I use them mostly to look for the wild bunnies in my yard and to see the owl leave its roost at night. The indoor cameras are dog cameras. My wife and I use them to view and talk to our dogs while at work. The weirdest thing I've caught my dog doing. I had made a batch of jerky, put it in a large Ziploc bag, and place it in the dining room table in preparation for a camping trip. My 19-pound Shih Tzu, which is large for a TZU, was caught on video moving a dining room chair, jumping up onto it, then jumping onto the table. He ate the entire bag of jerky leaving only the bag. He did this in less than 10 minutes. Not a nanny cam, but a vid. My sil sat the camera down thinking she turned it off. I have over an hour of her teasing my toddler, in a mean way, with candy and popsicles. She started telling him that he would get some, then held it just out of reach. She then ate it in front of him making mmmmmmm sounds. She was also calling him mean, and weird names like Turd Muncher, and Ricky Retardo. The camera got all the audio, but only some video. At the end of the video is when we got home. When I confronted her with the video, she started claiming I doctored it. I was a liar and a shat and hated her because she was prettier than my wife. She is not. That was the last time she was allowed around either of our kids unsupervised. She was the sil for 10ish years and is now the crazy Karen ex-sil. I can't have a presence on social media because she attacks me all the time, says Liz etc. I'm also estranged from my brother because of her. 10 years of her warped his perception of our family. He still thinks some of the whacked out things she accused our dad, sister, other brother, and various other family members of. No reasoning has convinced him of the truth. Not even the thought that, if video evidence refutes some of the claims, then all can be considered suspect. I may get comments and advice of what I could do, but in the end you can't fight crazy, and sometimes life is just not fair. The only thing I have done to make things better is ignore her. She eventually just starts attacking someone else, like an annoying yipping dog that just needs to annoy. As for my brother, I hope time will help to fix things. I also think that he might just be more like her than I think. Birds of a feather fly together. We have a nest in our kids' room and living/dining. You can see partially into the kitchen from the living room cam but not much. About the second week into using a new sitter we catch her talking tons of shit about my wife and how she coddles our 18-month-old son. Bragged about how she was going to quit at the end of the day because she hates working for us and doesn't like our son. While she's in the kitchen she puts him in his high chair and turns on an iPad for him to watch Elmo. No screen time allowed. He asks to get down and go play after a few minutes and she says no. He starts to cry and she basically yells at him, OMG, are you serious right now? You're so damn needy. So he cries harder. About 10 minutes later she takes him back to his room where he calms down. I get home a few minutes later and send her on the way. Sitter, oh, you're home early. We had a rough morning, but we are feeling better now. me, yeah. Hey, you know that camera in the living room is on all the time and I can hear everything you say and do in the kitchen, right? She kinda stuttered and I told her to go. Then me and my kid hung out all day and had a blast. The thing that got me was being mean to my son, like he's not even 2 yet. I dog sit for some neighbors, one of which told me she has a camera in the living room / dining room for her dogs. You know, those ones that dispense treats. Anyways, I thought it was a strange essential oil diffuser until she told me what it was. I was being paid to play with them for an hour, but she found out that I was actually staying for 2 or 3 hours. When she asked me about it, I think I said something like I'd want someone to do the same for my dog. Ever since then she leaves me treats in the kitchen and even got me a Christmas present from the dogs. I travel the US for work and am fortunate enough to be able to bring my 2 beagles with me. They have never been away from my side longer than the time I've been at work. They are 10 and 13. I have a camera that I use to check in on them sometimes, mostly because my larger beagle is quite the ingenious guy, opening doors, scooting chairs over places, so he can jump up onto the counters, etc etc. Last year I was in Oregon and had to go home to Michigan for an emergency. I do not fly with them, I will only drive. So I was in a pickle and reluctantly hired someone off of Rover that was willing to come stay over at my hotel room for 3 days. She was great, kept up on texting me about the dogs, said things like tossing them a ball right now, so I would check in via the cam when I thought it was appropriate. This woman was amazing. Not only was she playing with them enough to make them exhausted, she was even teaching them new tricks, making them use their brains to solve puzzles, and even got my 42-pound beagle to get up on her back so she could do push-ups. She was an avid CrossFitter. I was extremely happy. My story isn't that interesting, but I have a camera to check in on my rabbit when I'm not there. The biggest surprises were mostly just how almost nobody followed my pet sitting instructions. The one exception, ironically, was my brother, who claimed to hate the rabbit and always wanted to get rid of it. I got an alert one day that my camera had detected movement while my bro was there taking care of him, and I decided to take a peek. I opened the app connected to the camera and saw my bro walk into my room, lay on the floor, and start playing with my rabbit. It just warmed my heart. Friends of ours don't have kids but have dogs. They were going out of town and told the dog sitter about all of the cameras, including the one that is outside but sometimes picks up reflections and will actively notify them of motion. The dog sitter seemed to get it, but she forgot to convey that to her boyfriend, who came out and walked around naked quite a bit. I got a nanny cam to keep an eye out for my elderly grandfather, especially when the homemaids were there. My grandfather started asking for lots of cash and couldn't remember what was happening to it. A brooch that my aunt was supposed to get disappeared, and then I heard reports of my grandfather being inappropriate with some of the home health aides. He was busted squirreling away his medication that he was supposed to be taking in his chair, giving money to an aide and sexually harassing another aide. My family bought one to see our dogs when we leave on vacation twice a year. It's one where they can hear us, and we thought it'd be great. We hardly used it. We also asked our maid to dog sit for us while we were out. Once when we looked at the feed, we saw the dog sitter there a solid 30 minutes early, just petting the dogs and playing with them. She's since retired from working, but she was the sweetest old lady and we love her. Another time my dad left a wad of cash on top of the washing machine, about $600, and she put a rubber band around it with a note saying he misplaced it. My uncle told me this once when a babysitter was holding his daughter, my older cousin, when she was a baby. The baby was playing with her toys and she somehow swallowed a small piece of something, and the babysitter performed the Heimlich, but for babies. There's a version of that for babies IDK where I found it though. She saved my cousin and her family was thankful. They have no idea where the babysitter is now, but right now she's supposed to be around her late 40s. We have a security camera in my bedroom for my free roam bunny, so we can keep an eye on her whilst on work if we go on holiday etc. Well, my dad is 50 and is a big bloke who acts like he doesn't like pets. Came over to visit one day whilst I was out. He went in my room and crouched down calling the bunny. He spent an hour trying to pet the rabbit and kept repeating in a soft voice, "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to pet you and see how fluffy you are." He just about shit himself when I spoke through the security camera to tell him she's very fluffy. This isn't something that I caught a babysitter doing, but I remember that I once saw on TV the case of some parents that went with her baby to the doctor because she cried a lot for apparently no reason. The doctor told them that she looked really stressed and asked them if they were doing something that could make her act like that. They didn't. Then the doctor and the parents noticed some really tiny dots in the girl's belly, and they had no idea where they came from. The babysitter told them that she had no idea, but they didn't believe her and secretly put cameras to spy what she was doing. Turns out that she was crazy. She was stabbing the baby with a needle from time to time and doing things like shaking her cradle incredibly hard to torment her. Of course, they called the police, confronted her, and she got arrested. I was caught in camera a few times. A family who had bunnies caught me on camera booping noses to the beat of the song I was singing. Little bunny for hopping through the kitchen, picking up all the lettuce and munchy munchy munch. A different family saw me get fucking tackled by their 95 pounds mastiff puppy, and they immediately called me to make sure I didn't have a concussion, since I just kinda laid there for a while. I was fine. I just got the wind knocked out of me. Yet another different family saw me reading a book to their kids and later complimented all the voices I make. I had no idea they could hear audio, and I got so embarrassed since I really did go all out. My grandpa was staying with my parents, but they figured it best to hire the regular sitter to watch my younger siblings overnight, since they didn't think my grandpa was up to the task and they were attending a wedding a couple hours away and made plans to spend the night in a hotel nearby. They had set up a nanny cam in a couple room, my siblings' bedroom, the master bedroom, living room and kitchen, all motion activated. They normally wouldn't bother looking through the footage if everything seemed fine upon returning home, and their master bedroom cam had never been triggered before. When they returned, they noticed that the cam in the master bedroom had been triggered, so they decided to take a look. Cut to footage of my grandpa and the sitter both naked, aggressively making out from the entrance of the room, staggering while intertwined towards the bed, and then about 20 minutes of banging on my parents' bed. The sitter was about 20 years old and my grandpa was around 70 at the time. My dad called me immediately after he saw the footage, laughing his ass off, and I could hear my mom crying in the background, completely mortified from what she had just witnessed, and shouting at my dad to throw out the sheets and kick out grandpa. My mom called the sitter to confront her, and she just apologized and said there was connection or some shit to that matter. When she asked my grandpa what he was thinking, he just said, "At my age you must seize every opportunity." I wish there was audio for the build up. I lay awake at night sometimes just wondering what kind of game my grandpa was talking to get in that sitter's pants. When I was around 12 years old, my parents caught my babysitter on camera stealing my Northeast's games and shoving them into her pants and shirt. They confronted her about it, and she kept denying it until Ninja Gaiden fell out of her pant leg. My mom took her into a room and made take out all the games she stole. She literally had games shoved under the strap of her bra on her back so that she could sneak them out of the house, and others were put inside the waistband of her underwear. She must really thought about this for a while. Anyway, we got the games back and she was sent home without pay. Not my kids, but my sister's. This was when my nephew was still very young and my sister was still breastfeeding. Long story short, my sister caught the babysitter drinking her breast milk. She had her suspicions because my nephew would go through twice as much milk when the babysitter was taking care of him. My sister set up the camera and caught the guy in the act. Apparently the guy was some sort of fitness nut and had read that breast milk can be very beneficial. As weird as it sounds, my sister ended up working out a deal with the guy. She got him to drop the price of watching the kid in exchange for a bit of breast milk every now and again. We hired a dog sitter over the Thanksgiving holidays to check on the pooch, feed the cats, get the mail, etc. Edit. Definition pointed out the various security cams to her. She asked if she could bring her sister along for company. We said sure, no problem. The sister, we found out in conversation, attends a nearby hyper-conservative fundamentalist school. When the hired sitter took the dog out and the fundy sister had the house to herself, she took the opportunity to scream "Fuloak" at the top of her lungs a few times. Not a lot else. Just paced around the living room dropping high decibel F-bombs. Gotta find some way to vent that fundy angst. I know of a person that was taking care of a house plus dogs and horses. The girl played with the dogs, but forgot to mention a huge leak with the water. Ended up costing thousands of dollars. She was fired. They saw this on the camera. Just remember, there's always somebody or something watching. People who were mentioned in someone's suicide note. What's your story? My partner took her own life last year. I had become a carer due to her poor and declining health, and she was despondent, going from a life as an active working professional to being stuck at home with her mind and body letting her down. Her note was addressed to me and me alone. She texted her father. In many ways it was beautifully worded. She expressed her eternal love for me and recognition of mine for her, which gave me comfort that she did not die feeling unloved. She stated that she and I had done our best and fought so hard for so long, but she couldn't go on. Thank you for everything you did. There is nothing more you could have done. She said lovely things about me and ended with love for eternity, which I hang on to on my dark days as belief that we will meet again and her spirit lives on. I know I couldn't do more. But she was only 38 and fought so hard for years as her body failed from combined autoimmune illnesses. Nothing that would kill her itself. Even crueler in a way, it just robbed her of life bit by bit. He wanted me to know he loved me. That it wasn't my fault. That I was the best friend anyone could want or have. That I should have his car. That he thought he was going mad and was saving his brother and me from the madness. I showed the note to my therapist. She thinks he had schizophrenia. His mom did. It's been 6 years. I'm still not over his death. Doubt I ever will be. My mom committed suicide after finding out that her tumor was malignant. She had just lost her father a year before, and her mother died in treatment for cancer. She laid everything out, notes to specific people, and how she wanted things done. I have always been an old soul and she planned for me to find her as I would be the reasonable person I am. But that day I was invited to try out for the debate team, so I came home late. And my little sister was the one who found her. He just got back from Iraq, Marine. He called me up. I wasn't very close to him, but we both served. Michael. We talked for about 2 weeks before it happened. He talked about how much he loved his mom, his brothers in the service. I thought everything was normal. That's shit we all talk about after coming home. He shot himself over the phone. I still can't get the sound out of my head. Navy took 2 weeks to send a chaplain. Then sis was involved. When I returned home I found out that he had left a ruck for me. He left a rucksack for me, and I couldn't do anything for him. He gave it to his parents, and had asked them to give it to me. Once did many military funerals. I was asked to help out on one, but it was a shitty time. Saturday, early morning. I praised the memory of a young father. I presented the flag to his 5-year-old daughter. Her mom died of cancer a few months ago. That was the hardest moment of my life. I had to look a little girl in the eyes, no tears, and give her her father's flag. That's what broke me. I had lived with Craig for about 8 months before he killed himself. I'd known him for 4 years before that. We met at a metal gig, and he was a short thin guy who almost got trampled in a mosh pit. We knew he was going a bad way as soon as he started hanging out with the group we all knew did heroin and similar regularly. Maybe 2 months after we started living together, I tried to help him as much as I could. There were so many nights when he got back, clearly out of his mind on whatever it was he'd been doing, and he'd stay on the couch in my room instead of going to his own. He didn't like to be alone. I spent a lot of mornings cooking for him and generally making sure he was okay, but it was like shoveling snow in a blizzard. He'd just go, do the same the next night. At the end of that 8 months we found him in his room having overdosed. We realized it was intentional when we read his note. A lot of it was about his family problems, his mental health, and just generally how terrible he thought the world was. Then near the end was a little paragraph about me, thanking me but saying I made the decision to end his life more complicated. He asked me not to blame myself. He then rambled some more, and it was clear he'd been high whilst writing it. I moved out a month later. A good friend of mine killed herself after her son died. She had always wanted nothing more in the world than to be a mother, and when her son was born we were all very happy for her. 2 years later, he was diagnosed with a rare genetic illness that was some kind of muscular dystrophy. It was a very slow, very painful process and there was nothing she could do, only watch as her son slowly lost his just newfound ability to crawl, talk, and eat. After a year he was connected to all kinds of hoses keeping him alive. She had to feed him through a tube, his breathing through a oxygen hose was weak, and he looked miserable. After 2 more years at the age of 4 he died. We attended his funeral, we talked to her, and through all this, she seemed so strong. She never let anyone see her weakness. But on the funeral day, she broke down and cried and told us what hell she had been going through. She knew there was nothing she could have done to prevent this, that she wanted to be strong for her son, even though he couldn't open his eyes for the last months, and how she sometimes wished for it to be over sooner, so he wouldn't suffer so long. One of her other friends said that it will get better, slowly but eventually, because she didn't know what to say. None of us knew, except those set phrases. A week later she had killed herself, but not before writing a personal note to each and every one of her friends and her family, explaining how she could never get over the death of her child, and that we shouldn't be sad, because she didn't end her life, because she was sorrowful, but hopeful to see him again. We try to meet every year on her death day in a pub we used to drink. It's been 6 years since then. My girlfriend killed herself a little over a year ago. We were fighting, and I was planning to leave her. She sent me a message that she hoped her death weighed heavy on me for a long time while I was sleeping. She was dead in the bed next to me when I woke up. When my stepdad and the father of my 3 younger brothers killed himself last month, he didn't leave a note. What he did do, I didn't even know that was possible, was queue up 3 texts so they wouldn't be received until the morning after. At exactly 8 AM, all 3 of my brothers received a text from him. To my 2 oldest brothers, 19 and 17, I love you forever. I'm sorry, I just can't live with this any longer. To my youngest brother, 13, you are a very special boy and I'll love you forever XX. I asked my youngest brother if it had made it better or worse. He said worse. No note, just a phone call to preteen me that had stayed up too late because my single parent mother had gone out looking to score whatever pills would sate her addiction. Kid me had no idea, adult me now knows it was obvious. I don't remember the call completely, but I do remember being annoyed she'd kicked me off the dial-up by calling in. She said and made me promise a bunch of things that felt very serious, but also very confusing, and then we hung up. Police officer knocked on the door a few hours later and everything changed. No one but me knows about that phone call, especially not my brother. I'll be the exact same age she was, down to the hour, in roughly 500 days. I keep a countdown timer on my phone. One of the promises she made me make was to live longer than she did. My birth mom killed herself, and I know she wrote my name down on a letter. My birth family never let me see it, but I have speculated for many years. I think she felt bad for putting me up for adoption at a young age. The adopted family that took me in didn't really want me, so they sent me to a bunch of boarding schools during my childhood. I was sexually abused at those schools, so I think my birth mom somehow thought it was her fault. Funnily enough, I remember blaming myself for her death after it happened. It took me years to get over, but I'm doing much better. I still miss her. Not really a suicide one, but a end odd life goodbye one. He was sick and almost got through it, but at the end with weak immune system, cold was enough to get inflammations on everything. He was almost 18. Till this day the perfect person for me. And most important of all, the only real rock I had who was there from the moment we first met. He wanted to make me laugh. He always did that. Made a few jokes. Terrible ones, dad ones. Still made me laugh, and made the pain more durable. I miss those lame jokes. It was my dad's note, telling us boys that he is so proud of the men we've become, and even just writing that now makes me cry happy and sad tears. It's been just over 4 years now. He was a great dad and had such a profoundly positive impact on who I'm today. Even with how it ended, I couldn't ask for a better dad. He was something else. I'm a lucky kid. Wish he could see me now. I'm glad he knew my wife before he went. Wish he could meet my nephew. I love you, Dad. I still miss the hell out of you, you ornery old hippie. You're still my hero. Thank you for everything. Welp, wasn't expecting that wave. Thank you. It's been a minute since I cried for him. My boyfriend killed himself when I was 18. He was 19, and I waited 7 years, January of this year, to read his whole note. When he first passed away, I took care of his elderly parents for months following, because he was an only child and they could barely function, let alone plan a huge funeral. It was horrible. It took every ounce of strength that I had to get through that time and care for them on top of it. I found the note underneath a bowl pipe that I had lent my boyfriend, which he had hidden in a false bottom compartment thing in the center console of his car. I read the first few lines and then immediately hid the note in my favorite book. I couldn't bring myself to muster the courage to read it completely at that time, but what I had read had been enough to absolutely shatter his parents and I didn't have the heart to give it to them. I kept it for years, and with each year that passed, I held on to more and more guilt. I completely spiraled downwards after the funeral, drinking heavily, putting myself in danger, and avoiding the world. I moved halfway across the country, maybe to start fresh or maybe to run away, I don't know. I kept the unread note, it weighed heavily on my bookshelf for years. I almost read it many times, usually when I was drunk or suicidal myself, but I was always too afraid to find out that my fears were true, that there was something that I could have done, or something that I had done to cause him to do such a horrible thing. His parents are actually doing well now. They're selling the house finally, they got a dog, and are more actively involved with family and friends. I love seeing them allowing themselves to be happy when I know that they are still filled with a terrible grief. I'm not sure if I did the right thing by keeping the note, but after reading it, I'm certain that they wouldn't be the people that they are today if they had read what their son wrote about his life and about them when he was at the lowest point imaginable. One of my best friend's mother committed suicide and had a little message for her 2 children in her suicide note. It was mostly straight down the line apologetic and an explanation as to why. Spinal cancer which metastasized, and it was only downhill for her. She did her taxes, paid all her bills, got all her paperwork in order, wrote a farewell note, and swallowed a bottle of painkillers. I only managed to see a small section of the note as I was the second non-emergency person on the scene. My friend was the first, but enough to know it was her way of trying to make things as painless as possible for everyone else. Even though nobody was mentioned, this specific note stays close to my heart to this day. My dad is a retired detective, and one day a few years ago he came home from work visually distraught. I usually talk to him about his day, so I asked him what was wrong, and he told me a young man, I think around 22, had committed suicide and the note broke his heart. I asked what it said and it read something like, "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. I hope to see you both someday in a place that's beautiful." 7 months ago my girlfriend committed suicide because her father was abusive and her friends were all against her because she started dating me. I believe one of her friends had a crush on me. A week later I got a text from her with the suicide note and it read, "Dear little Perry A47, I just want you to know that you were the most kind person I ever met, and I love you for that. However, I can't take it anymore, and I know you will find someone after I'm gone, so as you're reading this, I've already taken my life. Thank you for helping me the best you could have, and thank you for being my boyfriend." After I read the text I immediately rushed over to her house, which was about 20 minutes away, and I arrived the police already there, and my heart sank, and felt tears overflowing out my eyes. I entered a state of deep depression and almost attempted suicide as well. I started drinking and cutting myself, and after about 2 weeks I stopped going to school and blocked myself off from my friends and family. I wouldn't answer their texts and calls, and eventually they finally had enough and assigned me a therapist, and I'm still trying to get over it, but I'm getting better. My best friend killed himself when we were 16. Definitely has been the hardest thing I've ever had to go through in my entire life. I've questioned reality since that day, and I think part of my questions comes from the fact that he didn't leave a note. There was no final goodbye. I'm not sure if a note would have helped bring everyone closure, but writing no note, I just know he was in such a dark place and didn't want to burden anyone. It was all because of a girl, and I'm near positive if he would have been able to survive 6 months post breakup he would have been fine. That's what is so scary about deep depression, that you can't see any light at the end of the tunnel. Your mind is consumed with your emotions and you feel no hope. He made a permanent decision to a temporary problem, and although his pain is gone, everyone who loved him is still in pain. I feel so bad for his dad who found him. My stepdad committed suicide when I was about 7 years old. In his letter he wrote he was lonely since my mother left him. He mentioned that he couldn't live anymore because I didn't want to see him anymore and didn't want to talk to him on the phone. When he called my mother the last time, I found him hanging on my grandmother's attic where I played hide and seek with my cousin. At this time he was 3 weeks dead. It's difficult to think about it. Even though I know I was just a child and I had my reasons, he was an alcoholic who beat my mother in front of me every time he drank. I still feel guilty, and for that feeling I hate him. On the other hand, I know he was a wreck, destroyed by his parents. But neither my mother nor I were responsible for this. Been into. First, best friend's younger brother shot himself downtown in a popular street section an hour after I was the last to speak with him. We weren't the best friends, but we grew up together and shared many moments. Last moments together, I bought him a Bud Light and a shot of Pendleton whiskey. His and my thing. He wrote how I almost changed his mind with my words. I didn't know till a week later what he'd done. I feel terrible for not seeing it. His brother and I broke apart heavily afterwards, after being best friends since our junior year. Second, my ex-girlfriend from high school, year and a half out of high school. She called me the person who listened most to her. I didn't love her, but I did care about her. Attended her funeral and some treated me like the cause. Others actually realized she was going to die sooner or later from a heart condition. I respect her choice. She chose the way she lived and died. What's your most successful unethical life hack? I once got a parking ticket, and instead of paying it, I dipped it in water, crumpled it up, and had my GF bring it to the police station a week later saying she found it on the street. I went online to see if the citation was still there, and it was gone. That joke Dave Chappelle had about riding in the car with a white guy and the guy saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't know I wasn't allowed to do that." I've done that in tons of places. I've wandered into restricted areas in zoos and in theme parks, got caught and was like, oopsie. We were looking for the bathroom and we got lost. Most of the time they'll escort you back to the main park area, but sometimes you'll meet someone cool and you get a behind the scenes tour, so long as you know how to chat someone up. Make some small talk, don't come off as a creep or like you deserve to be back there. Most of the time the low level employee will take you the long way back to the park and you get to see some cool stuff. Heck, one time in a zoo I got to feed some giraffes because me and a buddy got caught wandering, and this lady was frantic. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she's behind schedule getting food to the animals, so we offered to help, since we both had restaurant experience dicing vegetables. 20 minutes later we have like 10 bowls of food ready, and she let us feed some giraffes carrots and stuff. This one's a long game, but start building a reputation as a bad liar. Tell mundane lies with overt tells. Over time people will trust your truthfulness on everything else you say. The possibilities are endless. I got a parking ticket my first or second semester at a junior college. Can't remember anymore. The ticket came in a little unmarked and unsealed envelope. Instead of getting a permit, I put that envelope back under my windshield wiper every morning, so they thought they had already given me a ticket. I did that for 2 or 3 semesters before eventually transferring. So, paid $1.30 ticket for over a year of school parking. If you want to buy something online, first create a dozen fake email accounts and then badger the seller with absurdly low offers. Like really be mean and a dick about it. Next sign into your real email and offer a low but reasonable offer. He'll be so relieved to hear from someone that's not an asshole that you can get a nice discount when he accepts your low offer. Complain. ML giant companies with some mundane dissatisfaction with their product, and many will just throw replacements or high value coupons at you. Some companies are way more responsive than others. Had new phone in back pocket. Sat down without thinking. Cracked screen. Next day, received call from provider asking if I was sure I didn't want protection plan. I had declined. I told him he was a good salesman and accepted. Returned phone for new one 2 weeks later. Cancelled protection plan. Back when I was doing research for a novel about con artists, I enacted a number of borderline legal schemes just to see how they'd play out. While my favorite of those technically counted as fraud, the one that was most effective only barely crossed the line. All I needed was a dress shirt, some black slacks, a bow tie, and a basket, all of which I bought from the local thrift store for about $15 in total. Thus prepared, I made my way to a semi-fancy restaurant and went directly to the men's restroom. A few minutes passed before I was able to put the rest of my plan into effect. And since this was before smartphones were quite so common, I spent the time figuring out exactly where I should stand. Still, I didn't have to wait long, and after the first of my marks entered the lavatory, I went through a practiced motion of turning on the faucet, pumping the soap, and offering him a towel when he was finished washing his hands. As the man was thanking me, which he did with little more than a mumble, I made a point of very subtly glancing at the basket that I'd brought along, positioned near the edge of the counter. I didn't get any money from that first guy, unfortunately, nor the fellow after him. In fact, it wasn't until after I tossed a few of my own dollars down that people started tipping me, but the cash came much more freely from then on. It took me about half an hour to earn back my initial investment, and about 45 minutes more to double that. By the time that 2 hours had elapsed, I'd managed to make just under $50, which was a better pay rate than I'd received from a legitimate job at that point. Anyway, if you ever feel like pulling a similar caper, here's what I learned. Choose a venue that's nice, but not too nice, or you'll run the risk of encountering a real bathroom attendant. The restroom near the bar sees the most traffic and usually isn't frequented by employees. Make conversation with the people who initiate it and avoid it with people who don't. Clean out your basket, save for maybe a couple of ones and a single fiver after each mark has left. Oh, and most importantly, make sure to get out before you get caught. Need to replace an old video game controller? Go to GameStop and buy an identical one. After waiting overnight, go back to GameStop with your old / broken controller in the bag and return it for a full refund / exchange. Source: totally did it last week. Stuff a wadded up piece of paper into the inside of the change return hole of all the vending machines you see. Come back in a few days to reap your rewards. Use the self-pay kiosk at the movies. Instead of the regular adult, I choose a senior. I would do the child, but usually watching something R-rated. The 15-year-old ripping your ticket at the cinema rarely would check. If they do, you just play dumb and push the wrong button. Saves a few bucks. My dad gets air mattresses from Big 5 for free. He's been doing it for years. Whenever his old one breaks, he buys a new one, puts the old one in the new box, takes it back, and says it's defective, and gets his money back, and keeps the new one. I guess you could do this with a lot of things, but he limits his gig to air mattresses. Defer your federal student loans, as long as you possibly can, and when the time comes to pony up, or go to jail, get a job with the federal government. You'll pay much less and your loans will be forgiven in 10 years. If you don't want to pay anything back, defer for as long as you can, and then die. I don't know if this counts, but I have an obnoxious coworker that never stops talking, so I started sticking my hands in the hand dryers every time he spoke to me, situated in our workplace for hygiene reasons, so I couldn't hear him, and now he just doesn't bother trying anymore. Not sure if they still do this, but when I was in college, Amazon offered 6 months of Prime free if you use your student email address. My college, you can change your email address to something else than what they gave you as a default, so I'd just change it every 6 months and got Prime for free for 4 years. I used to scam free extra dipping sauces from MCDs. This is how. You go through the drive-thru when it is busy, order your McNuggets, pay for them at the first window, then when you get up to the pickup window, act like you forgot to buy extra sauces, and ask if you can buy them right then and there, while holding out a credit card. Do not hold out cash, because the attendant might just pocket it. Odds are they will just give them to you for free, since what you just did was throw a big monkey wrench into the finely run machine that is the drive-thru ordering / pickup process. My local MCD suddenly got really stingy with condiments, only giving you the minimum, and posting signs saying extra condiments would cost extra. They've since changed, and are no longer stingy, so I don't need to use this method anymore. Edit. I once tried the same thing at a Pizza Hut drive-thru. Got a free soda. Not exactly a hack, but make presentations, PowerPoint and such, using porn actresses / actors instead of stock photo people. If the teacher / professor doesn't watch porn, they won't suspect. If they do recognize the individuals, they probably won't call you out on it. Edit. I take no responsibility for possible or eventual motions taken by any educational entities as means to punishing you should this hack fail. I was caught speeding once. I have a concealed pistol license, but almost never carry. When I was pulled over, I handed the cop my driver's license and the corporal. He asked if I had a weapon and I said, "It's in the glove compartment. Do you want me to get my documents? I don't want to open it without your permission." He said, "Nope, the fewer guns I see, the better." Slowed down and left. There was no pistol in the glove compartment. Amazon Prime customer. Every time an item doesn't turn up the following day, even if you have received an email telling you it will be delayed. Every single time. Live chat Amazon customer services. I find I have to Google it as it's very difficult to get to from their website. Explain how disappointed you are, and that you pay extra to be a Prime customer. Usually get 1 month free Prime membership. I've got 5 months free membership so far and counting. Most items I actually didn't care they were delayed, but thought it was worth trying my luck. At the self-checkout, ring up your expensive organic fruit as inexpensive regular fruit. I have never gotten caught, but just play stupid like the checkout confused you, and in your frustration just picked the item that looked closest to what you had. I have this brother-in-law. He buys those gas-powered lawn edgers from Sears. The things are famous for lasting a season or two, since the engines are so temperamental. Anyway, he uses it all summer and fall. At the end of the season, he pours in a little extra oil into the gas mixture, takes it back to Sears, and says the engine is ready to blow because there's a lot of smoke coming from the exhaust. He then proceeds to start the engine right in the store to prove his point. This drives them nuts. They tell him to shut it down and proceed to give him a new one. Next year, repeat and reflush, different Sears store. I think he's on #5 now. If you have a life savings and want to get on welfare, instead of living off your life savings, buy a home with it. You just basically converted your money into an asset that the government won't consider when you apply for government benefits. Note, I've never done this, but found this out when seeing if I qualified for government assistance. If you think you may have to go bankrupt, keep one credit card current, pay the bill on time every month. When the bankruptcy is done, you will still have that card and be able to use it. Worked for a friend 15 years ago. I'm not sure if it still does. I didn't do this, but someone I went to high school worked at a Walmart pushing carts. He would find receipts left behind. If he found a receipt for something he liked, he would keep it. Later he would take whatever the receipt was for, and if he got stopped / sets off the alarm, he would just pull out his receipt and say he bought it during his lunch break. He bragged how the manager said they were being hit by a pro. Eventually he was caught when he tried to steal a wig eye. My friend and I went to a concert with $15 nosebleed tickets that we bought last minute. We printed them out on computer paper. When we got to the venue, I noticed the people going into the pit had yellow wristbands. I cut our paper into long thin strips and dipped them in mustard from the hot dog stand and made wristbands. We pulled our cell phones out to act casual and walked with a group that was going in. Gave a quick flash of the wrist to the security, and that's how we got $180 front row seats for cheap. Making quick grilled cheese by turning a toaster on its side, putting into slices of bread with a slice of cheese on one. Sounds simple, right? I even made sure that the cheese was the right size. Well, Murphy's Law happened, and now I have a toaster that looks like Shrek fucked it bareback and left his special present inside. We used to do this in high school/college to double our beer purchases, but it works worth anything. Two people go into a big store. This is specifically designed for Walmart, but should work any place with 2 exits, and fill up carts with the exact same things, 2 cases of your brand of beer and a bottle of wine, for example. One person checks out, leaves, then comes in another entrance to pass the receipt off to the second person waiting with the second loaded out cart. They then walk out of another exit, and if anyone asks for a receipt, you've got one, and it's for the right date, time, and products. The most unethical thing I know was to go to different schools and universities and start raising funds. I was maybe 17 years old, so I had the perfect look for a high school or early college. Dunno what it is in English. I'm German. Student. I would go around different classes to collect money for children in Africa, rainforests or immigrants. I appeared just like a student who was being a good Samaritan and was working on a project. The teacher would always tip something to act as a good role model, and several students would follow up to impress the teacher. Best thing about it was that, even if someone would try accusing me of anything, which never happened BTW, I could just donate the money for real and everything was well under the rug. Go the speed limit in the fast lane. Soon as someone gets real close, shift down. If using an automatic, just shift from drive to 3 or 2, then brace yourself. Wait till a few weeks after and go to the doctors and complain about neck pain from the accident. This will be a pricing buy-in. If you don't have okayish insurance, get some tests done and your doctor will be willing to tell you anything that allows him to charge your insurance. Then take those bills, findings from the accident, go to a lawyer that only gets paid if he wins. Shop around. Profit. Their insurance will most likely cover everything and only pop up as a higher premium for a few years and you can easily get 50k. If you do this to someone in a nice car, chances are higher for bigger payout. Only saying this because this is what someone did to my mother 10 years back. This might be a bit outdated now because it's so easy to order everything online, but if a local store doesn't carry the product you want them to, just call them and ask them if they have it and have a few friends call and do the same. Also ask if they have it every time you go in and have a friend or two to do the same. Eventually they will think that everyone is asking about product X, so they should start keeping it in stock. When I was younger, me and some friends got a local sporting goods store. Teachers who had a student who commit suicide. How did you and your other students react? What was it like after? Pair of suicides. Everyone just posted stuff about it on Instagram with a few fake crying videos for those who wanted a bit more attention. Everyone talked shit about this kid behind his back, but used his death for likes. I had a student commit suicide a year after he graduated. When he was in school, he was popular, smart, and well liked by teachers and his fellow students. I taught him for 3 out of his 4 years of high school, and I was floored when I heard the news. I felt like I knew him pretty well, but I saw no warning signs. I beat myself up about it for a long time. Honestly, I still wonder if there was something I could have done. Since he was a recent graduate, he still had friends in the building. There were lots of tears, most sincere, some for attention. Some students turned to the teachers for support, but we were equally lost. It was the hardest time of my teaching career. The funeral was packed. His classmates came back in town from college. Current students attended along with faculty and staff. I wanted to be strong and was able to hold back tears until I watched his mother walk out of the church behind her only child's coffin, absolutely wailing in grief. I will never forget that. I don't teach anymore, but I still think of that student and his family. I cared about my students in general, but I had a few I really loved. I really loved this student. He was so genuinely kind. His death was devastating. For months, I had dreams about seeing him in the hallway at school and I would call out his name. He would look back over his shoulder, smile, and keep walking. Junior year of high school, her identical twin died in a car crash outside of town. She was a very popular and nice person to be around. Within the next few months 2 suicides occurred of close friends that she had. Then within the next year after that, 2 more suicides happened. The school hired on extra consoling. 2 kids in my graduating class committed suicide our senior year of high school. Teachers were absolutely amazing. Hugs, advice, tears from some, the works. But one teacher, who was recovering from lymphoma and had just had a huge, year-long fundraiser rally thrown by her students to help her raise money for treatment, said to us, "Well, we all know what happened. You won't be getting any sympathy from me, and we aren't going to waste time talking about it." Now turn to page 47 inches. It was shocking. For someone who had just had so much compassion shown to her for her situation, and rightfully so, to turn around and just be so evil to a bunch of teenagers. I still can't wrap my mind around it. I wasn't his teacher, but we had an 11-year-old boy in our district commit suicide on a Sunday night. All the teachers came in Monday morning and heard about it from the dean of the school and the superintendent. The kid had gone to a feeder school for our middle school. So many of our students knew him and were friends with him. The kids already knew by the time they got into class that day. Word of mouth breaks the sound barrier with middle school kids. It was very hard to have a conversation about why an 11-year-old child felt so hopeless that he thought his only option was to kill himself. A lot of our students were very upset. Several of them called parents to come and take them home. Our counseling staff did a really good job working with the kids and families about everything that had happened and what to do next. I will say this, I'm glad we at least talked about it with the kids. We talked about feelings. We talked about why someone might feel like suicide was a good choice. We talked about getting help and managing stress. It was a good conversation. When I was in high school, I went to the funerals of 15 people who committed suicide. The school treated it with radio silence, even though it was obviously an epidemic. I wish someone had at least talked about it. I feel like it might have saved some lives. A kid in my class odd. Some people thought it was an accident, but I believe it was a suicide because some kids labeled him a snitch after someone he knew got arrested for drugs. He started skipping school a lot, then a few weeks later he died. It was my science teacher's first year of teaching. We came in the next morning, and he got choked up and said, "I'm sorry, I just don't think I can teach today." He spent the class period at his desk, just staring into space. I think he knew the kid was troubled and tried to get him interested in school again but failed. It must have been really rough for him to deal with that, especially in his first year of teaching. In high school a girl hung herself. There was an assembly to tell everyone what happened and to let us know that counseling was available. Time off was given for the funeral. It became a sick competition among the students over who knew her best, with everyone wanting to lay claim to the tragedy. You aren't meant to say it, but she wasn't a nice person. She was a nasty bully, and she was awful to most people. But on her anniversary her friends waxed lyrical about how she was an angel, and she was the nicest person in the world, and about how the world is missing a princess. I keep my mouth shut. No one really knew her before she committed suicide. School counselors came to every class she was in to offer support if needed, but then the classes continued as normal immediately afterward and never spoke of it again. The school didn't even release her name beyond the classes she was in. Most students had to Google what had happened. The fact that she was so unknown meant that shock and guilt were the dominant emotions, the latter for the teachers especially. I cried, but I felt guilty mourning someone I never knew. The students were a little in shock, but generally got on with it. Some of his friends said they were worried about him, to which my first thought was, why didn't you say anything then? Nobody sat in his seat after. A couple of months prior I had him give a talk to some of my younger students on a topic he knew a lot about, which was a law program at the school. He did have ambitions to become a lawyer. I told these students that this was the boy who died, and if they wanted to honor his memory, they should take part in the law program. I didn't have them again, and left the school, but a few years later one of those younger students is a top human rights lawyer. I like to think she is the lawyer he might have become, as I know he would have made it. My senior year of HS I worked in an elementary school library. The elementary school was in a low-income area and there were lots of sad things I found out about that year, but there is one particular thing that happened that rocked my world. There were two brothers, one in 4th grade and one in 5th grade. The 4th grader was cheery, helpful, and although he was not top of his class academically, he fit in just fine. His older brother was explosive, delayed academically, and extremely moody. Apparently the two brothers were living with their oldest brother, 19 to 21 years old, because there were so many problems with their mother, no father in the picture. Well, after school one day, the oldest brother sent the 5th grader to his room for misbehaving. When the boy didn't come down for dinner, he went to investigate and found him hanging from a lanyard off his bunk bed. They still aren't sure if he was playing and accidentally hung himself or actually intentionally committed suicide. Even if it was a purposeful act, he was delayed enough that it's relatively certain he didn't have a true understanding of the implications of his actions. Now to answer the questions, I reacted by attending the funeral, which was hands down the most mentally draining experience of my life up to that point. There was wailing throughout the service, which seemed to last forever. I was only 17 at the time, and I had never seen people in such anguish in person. It was devastating. The oldest brother tried to speak, but you couldn't understand anything he said because he was so grief-stricken. About a month later, I started regularly seeing the little brother at school again. He was still cheery and helpful. It was difficult to imagine how he must be coping, as I know his family had very limited resources. That was hard to see every day. As far as the kids, I don't know. They didn't seem to change much, but they were young, and this kid didn't seem to have many close friends. I feel like they were back to normal within a week or so. It changed me though. It was the first time I really thought about death and what it means. I hadn't lost anyone close to me, still haven't at 29, which I know is nothing short of a miracle, but for the first time I felt like I understood the permanency of dying. I add all my students on Steam and play video games with them on the weekends. I had a pretty big group of my world history students in a Civ 5 match at the time. One of my favorite students in that class killed himself a week before finals last year. It's still his turn. During my student teaching, I was in a school district that had had several suicides. Don't remember the exact number, but I think 4 or 5. In 1 year, another girl committed suicide, and that was apparently the final straw for the school to start bringing people in. I didn't have her in class, but I did have several of her friends, including her boyfriend. They weren't in class for a couple of days, but what shocked me was that nobody in class seemed to have an emotional reaction. To them it was just another piece of news. Not that they thought the girl didn't matter, they just kinda shrugged it off. They brought in special suicide presenters who showed a video about awareness. The video was fine. The presenters were some of the most insensitive, stupid people I have ever had to listen to. The highlight of their presentation was one of them saying, sounding super upbeat, "Can any of you guess why boys are more successful than girls at killing themselves?" Nobody wanted to answer. A few kids mumbled answers, and she said, "Nope. Boys use guns, which are much more effective than pills." At another point, the school's counselors came to each class. My cooperating teacher wasn't in there, which is a whole other story. So it was just me watching as the counselor went through her whole spiel, blatantly ignoring the fact that a girl in the front of the room was openly crying. I snuck some tissues up to the girl's desk and talked to her after the lady left, and then said something to the whole class. I don't even remember what, just kinda trying to tell them that I cared about them and give them info on suicide hotlines, because the counselors hadn't even thought to do that. Then I peeked out in the hall and saw the counselor standing right there. She was basically wanting to peek in and see if that girl was still crying, but not do anything about it. TL, doctor, suicide is becoming so common that kids are just kind of used to dealing with it. Unfortunately, some counselors are still totally clueless. I had a student commit suicide November of his senior year. I found out as I was going into a parent conference for another student. My eyes teared up, and one of our administrators asked if I wanted to reschedule. The dad I was meeting with was already waiting, so I went and handled the meeting. I then had to go teach my next period. Fortunately most students hadn't heard. It was a Friday, and I cried the entire 45-minute drive home. By Monday, everyone knew. 2,500 kids in the student body, and every single one knew what had happened. The library shut down, and privacy curtains were put up. Counselors were brought in. I didn't even wear makeup to work, because I knew I'd cry it off. His funeral was the day after Thanksgiving. I went with a coworker. It was awful. So many of my students were sobbing, and I couldn't fix it. I decided then and there I'd never lose another one to suicide. I went back to school to become a therapist specializing in adolescent mental health. It's become my passion. I'll be graduating soon. I think about him every day. I cry, still, and it's been years. I wonder where he'd be, and what he'd have accomplished. I think about his parents and twin sister. I hope they have peace. He wasn't particularly popular, but several students took it upon themselves to make Facebook posts about how he was the best friend, and how devastated they were. Each of them mentioned how they know he's watching them from heaven. He was a very outspoken atheist, so I knew they were all bullshitting. Working in residential life at a university, I've dealt with several deaths/suicides. Some my students, some others. I've never really been very affected by them, but I know my friends have. My first year working at a new school, and very early on in the semester, a girl was hit by a car and died. She was my friend's resident. He knew where she lived, and couldn't look at that window. We oversaw apartment complexes. Sometimes the light would be on, and he would freak out. The same day we found out she died, we found out another student committed suicide. My other friend has to take off that day every year, because she actually saw him deceased, and still has nightmares about it years later. Those aren't the only deaths/suicides we've had, but those are the ones that affect people I know the most. Had a student commit suicide at the end of last year. A lot of students took it hard. One student even got a tattoo of her name, as they were extremely close. The student who died shot herself in the head, but we just carried on as normal basically. We also had a student odd from heroin not even a month prior to this. You just keep chugging along. It means different things for different people, but you can't stop. Just remember them, and try to further yourself in their honor. I had a former student who just never fit in. He wasn't athletic to fit in with the jocks, wasn't part of the intellectual crowd, and was just socially awkward. I had lunch duty and every day I saw him buy 5 or 6 sodas and give them to a group of boys who would sit with him at a lunch table. Most days, they would open the cans and get up and walk away, only to leave him by himself. I asked him about it. Why do you do that? And his response was, I only do it so they will talk to me. I tried to help the kid out and make friends, but he didn't have a father in his life and I don't know if that played a role, but he never really took any advice I gave him. Another factor that probably didn't help was that his mom treated him like he was still a toddler. A lot of his school items were for kids younger than his age of 13. One day he used a gun on himself. The sheriff's report called it an accident, but our group of teachers knew what really happened. The funeral was at a local church, and most of the middle school was there. There were people crying, mostly groups of girls that never really knew him. The boys that he bought sodas for never really showed much emotion. I can't recall if anyone spoke to the counselors on hand for the next week. To me it was all surreal. This situation could have been easily avoided. My wife is a therapist. She used to work in schools. She got called into a school her company didn't contract with to do crisis counseling after a popular student athlete girl committed suicide. She says that the thing that still haunts her is just the sound of like 300 kids quiet and sniffling in the quad with the occasional wail. Horrifying. Teachers of Reddit, what was the worst child abuse or neglect case you've had? Serious. A girl whose parents and siblings used her as a scapegoat and their punishment for her was to whip her feet. They routinely whipped the skin from her feet to the point she was crippled, muscle, nerve, and bone damage. In care she underwent several surgeries to be able to walk again and now has severely scarred but usable feet. Lots and lots of dead children from physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. Ages 2 months to 18. Had a summer where parents kept dipping their babies into boiling oil for punishment. 2 died. One boiled to the point he didn't die, but had his arm amputated after being taken to the hospital by a family member. Others will be physically scarred for life. So much sexual abuse. Drug cases, so many drug cases. One parent's passed out using. Toddler got out of the house and into street and killed as several cars hit him. Other, a newborn baby half eaten by family's pet raccoon. Parents passed out in same room, but so high didn't respond to the screaming. This in just one city in the south of the US. Was a worker in child welfare, CPS. Left last year after all the public pressure of "you just steal babies from loving parents" bull got to me. People seem to not recognize the horrors of child abuse and how crazy common it is. Not the kind of abuse most would think of, but still horrible for the kid, regardless. I was teaching a consumer economics class to seniors in high school, and we were learning about credit scores. One of the students raised their hand and asked if having bad credit would prevent you from being able to open a bank account. After some additional questioning, I found out the student was inquiring because she had just turned 18 and didn't understand why she was being turned down from her local bank. I realized she had no knowledge of credit or banking prior, so I asked her to first speak with her parents and then told her I could help her get a credit report. Well, as it turned out, her parents were honest with her. As soon as she inquired, they had sold her information to her mother's best friend to use to open numerous utility accounts and who knows what else when their daughter was 14, completely destroying and defrauding her credit. According to them, they had done nothing wrong because they claimed they asked her and bought her a new pair of sneakers in return for her permission. I had to spend the next week with her and the counselor on the phone with police as well as credit bureaus trying to begin the long and arduous process of restoring her credit. The worst part is, she was a kid who was walking a thin line between moving forward to college or taking the wrong path. When this happened, she moved out of her parents' house and in with her boyfriend and put off starting college because she was working to pay the rent. To this day I don't know what ended up happening to her after graduating a couple of months later. I can only hope that she followed through and was able to straighten everything out, no thanks to her crappy parents. Probably pretty mild compared to some here, but a kid I taught at 3 years old already showed signs of emotional abuse. For example, having a panic attack when we gave him a red chair because to him it looked pink and he was a boy, not allowed to have anything pink. One day we saw a massive red and purple welt on his buttocks when we took him to the bathroom. We asked him about it and he said daddy did it, then got this look like he realized he'd fucked up. Throughout the day he found excuses to explain to every adult he saw that he had fallen over every time, looking anxious as fuck. The injury was bad, but worse was watching him try to mitigate the damage he had done by accidentally telling the truth. When his dad came to pick him up from daycare he would cry hysterically and refuse to go to his dad until someone physically took his hand and led him. It broke my heart one day when his name was called. He looked happy as a clam and walked to the classroom door. Then as soon as he saw his dad he stopped. His face fell, he started whimpering, and his bottom lip went. He backed away from the door trying as hard as possible not to cry so his dad didn't beat him for being soft. Again. 3 years old. Edit. This was not in a Western country, not USA, not New Zealand where I'm from. In response to this and similar experiences I came back to NZ, went back to uni, and am now in a position to rain hell on scumbags like the kid's dad. In my post I used the word mild. That was absolutely a relative use of the word. This kind of abuse is frighteningly common where it took place. There was nothing I could do because the locals saw no problem with it, including the school administration, and, I'm quite sure, local law enforcement. Had a student who was a foster kid. He had severe emotional disabilities. I started noticing how he would go around to all of the other students at lunch and beg them for their food they didn't eat. He would also flip the fuck out when you told him you were calling his foster mom. And by flip out I mean throw desks and whatever else he could get his hands on. I mentioned all of this to the guidance counselor. Come to find out, when the kid got in trouble at school, which was literally every day, the foster mom wouldn't feed him that night. DSS came in and took all of the woman's kids, 10 of them. She flipped out about not receiving a check for the kids anymore. Never heard anything else about it since then. No idea where the kid ended up. Had a little girl who was displaying extreme signs of abuse and neglect. She was already removed from care from her parents and she lived with her grandmother and step-grandfather. We called CPS on them, and weeks later we get a very angry call from the grandmother. The CPS worker came to her house and told them my name and pretty much word for word what I reported. The grandmother was demanding that I was to be fired. The principal set up a meeting with the grandparents, the board social worker, the school therapists, our classroom team, and the CPS worker. 99% of the time I'm fully on board with CPS and have a lot of respect for what they do, but this worker was a complete moron. We worked things out with the grandparents and thankfully my principal stood by me. The grandparents left and the CPS worker said she didn't see anything that was worth investigating. All the people from the board were like, "What the hell is wrong with you? Do you not see all the red flags? This little girl needs help." The CPS worker said she would keep the case open, but insisted that her report would say it was resolved at a school level. A few weeks later the step-grandfather died suddenly, and the little girl was struggling. She came to school with no food, dirty, weak like pee, and was constantly playing with her private parts. We called CPS again, and they said they closed their file, and were done with the family. We had an emergency meeting again, and we started to put a bunch of things in place to support her at school. Giving her meals, clothes, washing her face and hair, and giving her a lot of love. The social worker for the board went to CPS and fought to get the case open again. As soon as it was opened again, grandma moved 6 hours away with the little girl to move in with her new boyfriend. This was less than 2 months after the death of her husband. We sent all the info to the new school board and called CPS in that area, but because we are put of bounds they won't tell us anything. I pray every day for that little girl. Had a little boy who one day was crying in the bathroom. I went to assist him, only to discover his rectum was bleeding profusely. He explained he didn't want to play the game with mommy before school today, and mommy made him, and he got hurt. Not only did he have autism, but he had a small younger sibling who had no idea what was happening was not normal. We had to call CPS, but mom still came to pick up that day from school and we couldn't stop her. It came our mom had been assaulting both kids and dad had no idea. That one haunts me to this day. Update, we called CPS and the police and the father that day. The police said they would look into it along with CPS, but could not come and get the children. It ended up being the mother confessed to the father after he became watchful of the mother and questioned her. They obviously are divorced now, and he has sole custody of both children. I volunteered at a small religious school in Central Africa when I was in high school. There was one kid who had an infection in his scalp. You could literally smell it and see the fungus and eggs of some kind whenever he was in the room. It could have been taken care of so easily when it started, but no one loved his enough to do it. The students I have tend to be well taken care of physically, but emotionally and mentally they are not. We are trying to deal with huge percentages of students who have thoughts of self-harm, are highly anxious, and are not mentally healthy. I try to reach out to them all, because it's so hard to know what's going on at home. I just hope that I can be a little ray of sunshine in their day and they might feel comfortable coming to me if they need help or encouragement. Cases that pop to mind are the all too often 504 meeting where a parent is saying, in front of their child, that the kid isn't trying hard enough or he's broken in some way. The misunderstanding of mental health issues is common, but it's hard to hear a parent saying their child could choose to be a better student if they'd just try harder. The worst, the ones that make me cry, are the kids whose parents fill out my start of the year form, and when I ask what I should know about their child, or why they are proud of them, they say they aren't proud, that their kid is a disappointment, that they can't wait for them to graduate and move out. It breaks my heart. I had one girl in a survey tell me she just wanted to know for sure that her dad loved her. This isn't necessarily the worst, but it definitely keeps me up at night. We have a family at my school that we have called CPS on numerous times. Kids are still with parents, but we keep calling. The kids have told us we are not allowed to talk about home to you when we ask about things. If that's not sketchy, I don't know what is. The kids all look malnourished. Pasty white skin, dark circles under their eyes, just hollow looking. I don't know how else to describe it. One of them never stops talking, and we know it's because no one will listen to them at home. They all have behavior issues or anger problems, and we know it's because of the examples they see at home. Parents won't sign consent forms to talk to our school therapist because he's a mandatory reporter. At summer school last year, one of them asked me if they could go get a drink of water. It was the end of the day and I said no because parents could be there any minute and drinking fountains weren't close by. I told her she could get a drink when she got home. They'd also just finished lunch with juice/milk, etc. She looked at me and said, "They won't let me get a drink when I get home." I knew she wasn't lying, so I sent her. None of them are allowed to read books at home because a year or two ago one of them colored in a book and none of the kids would admit to it. So, no reading for them. This has been confirmed by parents. Even the kids are dying to read, so we assign them reading for homework so they can. One of them asked my colleague if she would up their reading minutes so they could read more at home. She obviously happily obliged. We've heard their parents pick them up by their heads and scream and swear in their faces. As soon as they get home from school they all get locked in their rooms. On the weekends they're locked in their rooms the majority of the time. Because they usually get fed something. Nothing has been done about that by CPS. They are not allowed to use the furniture in their living room. They have to sit on the floor. Last year, we fed them all before we sent them home for the day because we were never sure if they'd get dinner. And it wasn't because food wasn't available. It's seriously heartbreaking. And it's really sad to know we've done as much as we can, but our hands are tied. So, to try and make things better for the kids, we offer them every single after school activity and program we can. We try to give them as much of a break from home as we possibly can. I still worry it's not enough. Had a quiet small L student, 7-year-old Asian girl, I met with a few times a week trying to teach her English. She didn't show up a few times so I went and inquired where she was. Her father had beat her to death with a belt buckle. Mom knew it was happening and did nothing. By morning she had died of internal injuries. Both parents went to prison. I was a counselor at a before and after school program. I had this one girl that had really bad anger problems and was a not so good upbringing. Her parents were put in jail and she was put up for adoption. Her adoptive family wouldn't acknowledge anything she did. We figured they just wanted her for the money they get for adopting. They would ignore any picture she drew them. Everyone treated this girl like she was a freak because of her anger problems. One day she colored me a picture and signed it and gave it to me. I left the job, but I won't ever get rid of that picture. Oh lord. I'm a new teacher, so it still surprises me when I see it. To that I recall vividly, not strictly child abuse, but a messed up situation. I was a preintern in college teaching English to non-native speakers. I had the sweetest little first grader whose family was Cuban. We were doing a writing prompt about a time I was sick and this little girl looks at me and matter of fact tells me about the time I hid it under the table cause the police were here and I vomited. I was so surprised I didn't even know how to react and fumbled for a second. I was 20 and had never been in the classroom before. I eventually asked why the police came and she told me because mommy called them because daddy left a big bruise on her arm. Luckily I found out from my lead teacher that dad was not in the picture anymore. I cried in my car after that day. Now I'm a first year teacher in a middle school. I teach kids with autism and their self-care isn't always great. I have some kids who come to school with the same shirt and pants for a week straight. In September one of my kids had bed bugs for about a month straight. Reading this reminded me of a more mild, but still distressing moment from my early educational career. I was a summer camp counselor at a high-end summer day camp. I was working on / had finished, forget exact timeline, my degree in psychology, and one of my students was exhibiting the classic signs of childhood depression. Very intelligent, extreme frustration with peers who couldn't keep up, withdrawal into books and other non-social activities, anger / rage issues, and a few others. I told the director who also had training in psych and brought out concerns to his parents. They laughed in my face. I really hope he got the help he needed. Redditors who work with or around that ultra rich, what's the worst excess or waste of money you've seen? I went to a college with a lot of wealthy kids. My roommate freshman year was one of them. She was awesome and humble as fuck, but her family was loaded. We went to her condo in Cabo for spring break and our return flight was delayed by a day. Her dad was so close to playing $10,000 plus for a private jet to fly us back because I had 2 lectures the next day and my roommate had 1. I wasn't planning on going anyway, so I'm very happy we talked him out of it. They ended up getting their own jet a couple of years later, and I see a lot of pictures of their dogs with their own seats and tables on the plane. It's actually pretty damn cute. A very wealthy family invited me to play piano for a party they were hosting at their home, an English Tudor-style mansion. The music room had 2 Steinway concert grand pianos, one on each end of the room, worth perhaps $150,000 plus each. No one in the family played these beautiful instruments. They were just there for show and use by a pianist they'd hire for special occasions. I distinctly remember one guy in my class popping into Apple to buy a new iPad rather than walking back to his flat to pick up the one he had left on his desk. He did this more than once. He also paid £4,500 plus per week to live in a London apartment, above a post office no less than 100 steps from the uni, yet claimed he couldn't get to class in time. His father had ties to David Cameron's government, which led to him being almost untouchable at the uni, despite his utter ignorance of the subject. My ex-employer is very wealthy Arab dude. Complete fuckface. Biggest waste of money I've personally seen is $7K on champagne. He doesn't drink, bought it, took a Snapchat picture and then left. $50K for 3 days in Dubai. He didn't come back with any sort of luggage or anything. $5 million in 3 failed businesses, opened within months of each other. Cars he doesn't drive, Maseratis and Ferraris. He bought a brand top of the class Ferrari, had it for like 3 weeks and I never saw it again. But mostly just the way he does things. Buys a super expensive coffee from Starbucks, has a sip, throws it away, buys expensive as fuck clothes from expensive stores, never wears them. Has fucking real gold on these shoes that come in a big fancy wooden box. The stupid fuck walking around a grocery store once asked me if you get McDonald's flavor for food. A buddy of mine used to be a pilot on private planes for rich people. One time he was waiting for the guy he was going to fly that night at the main airport in town, and the guy called him and asked him to fly to a smaller, non-commercial airport that was closer to this guy's work to save time, because he didn't want to deal with traffic. This is not a very big town, so traffic is really non-existent and the drive would have been 15 to 20 minutes. Instead, my buddy had to redo his flight plan and make the 4-minute flight to this other airport. Probably cost the guy at least $5K. My friend is married to a plumber. He was once hired to set up a special room for a famous composer's wife's tortoise. It was a huge room in their mansion that his company set up to be arid all the time, like a desert. I believe it even had sand and cacti in it, and sun lamps. I don't know how much it cost, but it was more than most people spend on their houses. All for their spoiled ass tortoise. Nothing like the other people's stories on here, but I used to work for a hotel for years. It was not a fancy hotel, and it was not in a rich area. But a long-term guest of mine wanted to take me and my friend to the casino on his dollar. I knew this man for 2 years by this time, and considered hhim a friend, so we both agreed to go. When we got there he bought us all a drink, and then he proceeded handing us both a stack of $100 bills, like $1K each. He told us to gamble until we dropped. All he asked is that if either of us won the jackpot, that we would split the winnings with him. Coming from a modest upbringing, it felt like such a waste to gamble that money away, but we all ended up having a great time. And he never expected anything questionable in return. He was a very cool guy. I'm an accountant with a couple fairly rich clients. Most wasteful thing I have seen is a client who tore down a 6-year-old house to build an even bigger newer one. It had 9 bedrooms, 10.5 HTF bathrooms. It was his wife and 2 kids who lived in it. Next thing down is people who buy massive boats to use one every year or two. Why not just hire one FFS? My family hosted exchange students every year. Most of the exchange students were quite wealthy, especially compared to us farmers. But one student, we'll call him G. G was that insane kind of wealthy. He had never performed a household chore before. Didn't know how to wash dishes or vacuum. That kind of stuff. Apparently he normally lives on a giant yacht in Rio de Janeiro. Despite having maids do everything for him his whole life, he adapted really well to farm life and was always eager to help out with chores. He still flies back to visit us every couple years because it's cheaper to fly first class here to buy yacht parts and electronics and pick them up personally rather than buy there. A guy I knew in college came from an extremely wealthy family. At one point we happened to be in the vicinity of his grandfather's house and he asked if I wanted to stop and see his car collection. It was approximate 30 cars in his basement, basically a garage beneath his house with an elevator that took cars up to surface level. Mostly old Rolls Royces, kit cars, or just weird things like one of the last El Caminos ever made. The car collection didn't strike me as a waste. I assume most of those cars will at least hold their value. His lawn did. Completely flat. Thickest, softest, most evenly colored, and cut grass I've ever seen in my life. I doubt it was more than 1/4 inch high. No clippings or signs of a lawnmower. It literally just looked like a thick, hunter green carpet that had been unrolled, except it was about a ½ acre in size. I walked on it barefoot and it really felt like the softest carpet I've ever walked on. Edges perfectly trimmed. I cannot imagine the cost of maintaining something like that, and really what is the benefit other than status? The estate next to the one I live on is owned by some Saudi royal who came over for the summer, along with his 300+ staff, which all required their own 2017 white Mercedes. Of course, he doesn't have enough space for all 300 staff, so rents houses in a nearby town where houses rent for £2,000 a month. For clarification, by estate I mean I live in the grounds of a mansion which used to be owned by the Home Office and has 50-ish houses and flats on the grounds. The Saudi royal owns the next plot of land over and has to drive through our estate to get to his. Occasionally he will land his helicopter on the cricket field. I have a friend who is the head concierge at a hotel. Whenever there is a large event like a concert, the acts will usually stay there. It's that kind of place. He looks after whatever royalty, celeb or star stays there and makes sure they have whatever they need. He had Rihanna staying there a few years back. Her entourage hired an entire floor and totally ruined the place, but because it was Rihanna, they could do whatever they wanted. He went into all the rooms after they all checked out and all the mattresses had to be replaced as whoever was in there smoking put their blunts out on the bed. They didn't give a fuck. Money was no issue, so pay for new mattresses because you can't be asked to move. They also left behind a shitload of weed, so he took that for himself. They had some of the Saudi elite stay there once, and before the guests checked in, large trucks arrived carrying a selection of supercars for him. Then they sent a team in retile the bathroom and redecorate the rooms to be in line with the style he liked. After all this, the bloke decides that he was going to stay somewhere else. I was an exchange student once and met a bunch of other exchange students, including a group from some, I assume, expensivest college in Florida. I have seldom seen such a bratty pack of spoiled kids, though some were very nice. One bragged that she was given a new car for her 16th birthday and promptly crashed it into a fountain. So her parents got her a new one, which was just as well, because the new one was a nicer color. I would have to say that that second car was the worst waste of money I have ever personally encountered. When I was in college, I was employed by a neurosurgeon and his wife to do one thing. In exchange for being their pool boy, I lived in the pool house for free, utilities included. My job was to keep the pool clean and act as lifeguard when their kids swam or had a swimming party. During the 2 years that I lived there, I was lifeguard maybe a dozen times. The pool house was like the one on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Sometimes I bartended at their dinner parties and made 250 cash. Oh hell, where to begin? I worked for the founder of a multi-level marketing company once. She was no longer in charge of it, but still collected her quarterly residuals. I was hired as a pilot, but ended up helping other employees around the house, because it was too much sitting around. She had just moved and we unloaded 6 full-sized U-Haul trucks of fur coats and stupidly expensive clothes into the 25,000 square foot house. There were not enough closets to store them all, so we built rods in the attic and hung them all up there. I honestly doubt she remembers that they are up there. Most of the clothes still had the price tags on them. We filled 3 storage units in town with priceless art and antiques that I'm sure she forgot to pay the $100 a month bill on, and they were probably bought at some auction. She bought a $30,000 dog for her 11-year-old son that was a shithead. It was a personal protection dog that was trained in Dutch. The trainer and his assistant flew down from Canada to drop the dog off and transition him to his new owner. They were less than pleased when I informed them that the new owner was an 11-year-old sociopath, but they did their best. The dog was amazing and obviously extremely well behaved and would follow whatever command was given in Dutch. A few days later they had a birthday party and invited 80+ kids from their school. I watched from the far corner of the house as the 11-year-old told one of the unpopular pudgy kids from school to run as fast as he could. He gave him about a 100-yard head start before he sent the dog after him. I grabbed the card with all the Dutch codes on it frantically from my pocket and gave the down command as the dog was about 3 feet from the kid running. The littlest sociopath just laughed and walked away. That dog would have torn the kid to pieces. The place was just pure chaos all the time. I never did get paid. After about 2 months her attorney came in and convinced her that we were all stealing from her and let everyone go. Honestly, it couldn't have been farther from the truth. Everyone was trying so hard to keep her from imploding. Came to find out a few years later that the attorney was embezzling from her the whole time. Rich people live in an alternate reality because no one tells them no. It's not the excess or waste of money, but the attitudes people have. Most people have absolutely no clue the sense of entitlement many of these people have. Many of my clients are great, but at least half of them have no sense of normalcy, and they are personally offended when the world does not revolve around them. Some of my clients are big boys for major jewelers. Jewelers believe they own the fucking world. They really do. You would think they would be respectful to people so that they represent their companies well, but they don't. The way they speak to me and my staff, I've actually had to cut them off. And some of them are well-known people who are not used to being cut off because most companies don't want to stir the pot with them. I'm not afraid to put my foot down with them. The minute you call my staff classless for following policy or pointing your finger in their face and calling them young lady, the second you start rambling on about how you make more in a week than they do in a year, you can get fucked. Guys, don't support big jewelers. I know a bloke whose dad died and he inherited a construction company and sold it for millions and took a lot of drugs and became an alcoholic, and he used to get a chopper to take him home from the bar, like not even a 2-minute ride. He died not long ago at 43 yo from all the drugs and drinking. Apostrophe. There's, apparently, a Saudi prince who comes to New York City every year for the summer. And for the summer, he rents out, every single night, Theater 18 and the AMC Theater on 42nd Street, which is the biggest theater. If he chooses to come, the theater gets about 10 minutes of a heads up. His entourage brings in these giant chairs and a movie for him to watch. He does not watch whatever movies we have, to be clear. The entourage brings with them a movie that he's already picked. When I worked there, I never once saw or heard of the prince actually coming in. But every night I worked that summer, the managers would, without fail, pile into the last cleaning of the night and help us clean the theater. Top to bottom, not a single kernel left. Then, the GM would stay and watch the night cleaners come in and clean it even more. So, is the Saudi prince an actual person who comes to this theater? I don't know. But that's a hell of a lot of effort to put into playing a joke on your employees. And that the Saudi royal family is certainly wealthy enough to be able to afford it. What did a former friend do that instantly changed your opinion of them? Was close friends throughout high school. Even got one of his drawings as a tattoo. Lost touch after HS. Found him and emailed him about 15 years later. His reply: "Hi DD, glad things are going well. Let me tell you about this great product I'm lucky enough to be able to offer people like you. It went on and on, a pyramid scheme. I never wrote back. Sucks. I missed him. My dog's health drastically plummeted in one day. I went to bed, and he was great. I woke and he was dying from kidney failure. Took him to the vet, and he was put down in my arms, while I held it together until just after he passed, and broke into a waterfall of emotion. Got home with him, and grabbed a shovel. Made it to the garden and started digging. A car pulls in. My friend gets out with a shovel. Walks up and doesn't say anything. Just starts digging with me. A few minutes later another car pulls in. Another friend gets out with a shovel. I realized right then and there that I had made some incredibly amazing friends. An old friend once showed up at my house the night he found out the girl I was sort of dating was also hooking up with my other friend. He brought a bottle of whiskey and told it to me straight, even though the other guy was his best friend. We weren't actually that close before that, but it was a solid thing to do, and our mutual friend was fully aware what he was doing. I guess that's a 2 for 1. Was at an 18th birthday party. My boyfriend at the time left early because he had to work the next day, but my friend told me he had lied to me and gone home with another girl. I was quite drunk and impressionable as a result, and got quite upset. Then she suggested I should hook up with one of her older male friends as revenge. I eventually got a lift back to his place and found out it wasn't true. His mum had picked him up from the party and he was asleep in his own bed. Turns out she also liked my boyfriend and was trying to break us up so she could take a shot at him. We were coworkers at the time, and I put a lot of trust in her. I was new and constantly getting shit from higher ups over things I was supposed to know without having ever been told. She was my team lead and told me I could lean on her and ask for help anytime. Everyone on the team called her Mama Bear. I vented and confided about work to her a lot, and she listened and gave me advice. The shit from the higher ups only got worse. I talked to her more and more. Work started really getting me down about myself and stressed me out because I knew I was losing my job soon, and I had no idea why I was getting crap when I'd bent over backwards and worked long, unpaid hours to pick up my apparent slack. It took one of my other coworkers pulling me into her office, closing the door, and telling me to my face, "You're trusting the wrong people here. Stop telling anyone anything." And then she told me all the crap that the gossip mill had going about me. Things that I had only told Mama Bear. It turned out the bitches of the group were the only ones not going around making up drama and bullshit, and had been trying to get me to open my eyes for months. I was so flawed and betrayed. I started crying on the spot, but other coworker told me to dry that up and don't let them know they got to you. Hold your chin up and pretend everything is great until you can get out of here. I did just that, pretended I never found out just who was telling upper management that I wasn't cut out, wasn't putting in the work, wasn't getting along with the rest of the team, which had been true a year earlier, but then we all got along great, and anytime Mama Bear came to me asking if I wanted to talk, I told her nope, I'm good, but thanks. Close bracket. Last time I saw her I was still smiling to her face, telling her I was sad to not be working with her anymore, and I'd miss her. Bitch. Hope she jokes on her second face. Borrowed a vehicle for a week, returned it full of trash with both door handles broken and stinking of smoke. When I asked him about it, he said he didn't have time to clean up the mess, and his kid broke the handles, not him. We didn't talk much after that. Ditched me at a bar after someone punched me. He thought I was going to call the police on the venue, so he insisted he take my phone. It took me 2 weeks to get my phone back, and his dad was the one who gave it to me, which I only was able to do because I called my own phone myself, since the friend in question ghosted me. Needless to say, fuck that guy. Had an old friend that got into drugs. I shipped out to the military and hadn't heard from him in a few years. Apparently he was sent to rehab down in California. I was at the gym in Kansas one day working out, and I received a message from him that he needed $100 because he lost his wallet and phone. So being a good guy, and he'd never asked me for money before, I wire transferred him some to help him out. Turns out I actually helped him escape rehab, and the whole thing was a lie. He's doing better now I hear, but it didn't sit well with me and made me feel guilty for helping him escape and disappoint his family. I've pretty much cut all ties of communication with him. Drugs change people, it's crazy. This guy presented himself as the perfect boy next door. He was cute, had good grades, went to a private Christian school, and he had the perfect poster family. He was impossible not to like on the outside. And then, on the other hand, I had this other friend who had pretty bad OCD and was just all around socially awkward. She was really sweet at heart, but you really had to think through everything you said to her to make sure she didn't take it the wrong way. I had a class with both of these friends. The girl had a crush on someone else in the class who sat nearby and made it pretty obvious. She left the room one day and suddenly my do no wrong friend started expressing his sympathy for the guy she had a crush on. He was saying shit like, "Oh, I'm so sorry you have to deal with that, and I'll pray for you at my church." The second I try to defend the girl, I'm turned into some sort of social outcast. After overhearing, via eavesdropping, my new, slightly higher salary, he decided that meant I should loan him money, since I was rich from a job I wouldn't start for a month. When I refused to do this, he texted me, while I was having dinner with my new coworkers, that he'd always secretly hated me, and knew I hated him. And a bunch of other manipulative BS. I did not hate him prior to this. Suffice to say I cut him out of my life, and show that text to any unfortunate mutual friends that believe his sob story about how I'm an asshole. They usually cut contact with him after reading it, lol. I told her that I was planning on escaping my narcissistic abusive parents, and she goes to tell them that I was planning on leaving. All because she wanted to be able to stay near me. I still managed to get out of that situation, but she made my life very difficult and later tried to pin the blame on me. She also managed to convince a bunch of her friends to harass my sister for details on my current whereabouts. Wherever you are right now, Lisa, fuck you. I know all the responses here are things that negatively impacted opinions, but I have a positive one. When my dog suddenly and tragically died, she was only 3. 2 of my friends who I thought were more of my drinking pals / school friends showed up at my house with a few bottles of wine, vegan ice cream and chocolate, palm oil free, and just hung out with me while I sobbed and went through 1,000 different emotions. Really made me feel better and totally changed my perspective on my friendships. Until that point I didn't feel like I had any best friends and that no one really cared about me. The fact that they knew I was vegan and tried to avoid palm oil and food really made me feel loved. We became super close after that and are still best friends to this day, years later. I had 2 best friends that hated each other. C was fine with me hanging out with L, but L hated when I hung out with C. I made sure their paths never crossed to keep the peace. One random night L gave me an ultimatum, L or C. So I chose C, because who the fuck do you think you are? 25 years later, and I'm still really good friends with C. Don't give me ultimatums. Friend A was out of work. I had another friend, friend B, willing to give friend A a job instantly. No application or interview required. Passed along the contact info to friend A to talk to friend B. Crickets. Guy had no money for rent and basically stiffed his roommate who he was renting from 4 months. Said he would claim squatters' rights if he had to. Still always had weed though. Really showed me how lazy and selfish he really was. Stopped hanging out with that group as a whole shortly thereafter. I recently had to cut my best friend of 10 years out of my life when 4 different women came forward with similar stories of sexual assault. I knew this friend of mine had substance abuse problems, and I knew that sometimes he was a shitty person to be around, especially when he was 2 or 3 days into a bender, but I loved him and granted him a lot of patience and was very forgiving of his actions. That all came to an end when the assault allegations came to light. Seeing how these women were affected and still carrying these traumatic events with them was enough to tell my now ex-best friend to kick rocks. I've warned just about everyone in our friend circle about what has done as well. It's hard. I have dreams about him still, but I can't morally be friends with someone who would take advantage of the females in our group. The last day before I moved, my 2 neighbors who I grew up with were hanging out with me. One of them was pestering the other to leave to make their party, which I initially took no offense to. Then my other friend said, "No, this is her last day. I'm going to stay here." That meant the world to me. I'm a girl and my friends are guys, so I will admit I have lower expectations for this sort of thing. I realized that friend who stayed was a friend on a different level than the other. My friend was stationed in Kuwait for many years doing work for the army. He joined the army to gain discipline and to obtain benefits for the GI Bill, as well as gain a relevant skill set. Before that, he married a nice girl who was very sweet and seemed caring and had many interests he did, who happened to be the sister of one of his friends. He returned from duty and did contracting work on oil fields. He was paid well. With this money, he provided his wife a townhome, a new Subaru Outback, and for himself a good number of toys. She was going to school for her BSN. In 2017 though, the relationship took a dark turn as many do, and he told me they got into an argument. During that argument, she admitted she had not really liked him as much as she said she did, and that she really only married him for his GI benefits. It was quite a contrasting thing to imagine, given that 6 months prior they had had a vow renewal that was beautiful, with her giving a compassion speech. He divorced her within the month, sold the home, willingly divested of assets she requested per prenup, and moved in with his sister to states away. It was one of the worst days of my life helping him pack his empty house, because of all the memories I had there. I now rarely see him, and only interact with him on Discord when we game. He is not an expressive individual, but from what I can gather from my interactions, and from the others on the Discord server, my friend is a changed man from the experience. He is much more reserved, and I honestly think he is afraid of dating another woman, and being burned again. It makes me sad. I want to see him meet another woman, and be happy with her, rather than go through a doldrum of life. Getting him to admit his fears and anxieties would make him angry, maybe even offended, and lead to a falling out. I could even be reading him completely wrong. But in any case, I wish things were better for him. The girl still lives around, and I do not interact with her, though she has approached me at the hockey rink my brother plays at to initiate a platonic conversation. Girl don't know I'm a gay chubby chaser though, but every time I excuse myself and leave. The story has made me very angry with her, because she led my best friend on false pretenses for her own benefit. One particular day, I was sitting at a table in a cafe near our lab that we always go to. She came in requesting to sit in the seat I was already sitting in. Strike one. I conceded because it was a stupid seat and I like to choose my battles. She said she wanted to chat, but within a few minutes she has her head glued to her phone and completely ignored me. She was more than happy to talk about herself, but when I piped up she instantly stopped listening. Strike 2. I got up and left, and she didn't even notice. Strike 3. Lost contact with her a few years ago after a handful of one-sided attempts to keep in touch, but she never made any effort. Went to brunch, and he started hitting on the waitress hard. It was really uncomfortable, and she was clearly not into it, but he wouldn't quit. After that I noticed how he treated other people, and it was bad. Don't talk to him anymore. Oldest friend did the unforgivable and hit his partner, gave her a black eye. I went and got her and her kid and took them to her mum's house while the police were on their way. I've never spoken to the guy since, and any time he's tried to speak to me in the local town center, I completely blank him and act as though I didn't even see him, as if he was invisible. I see that it hurts him, but I cannot forgive him. I don't think the medication is working anymore. All I can think about is the rope in the basement. Totally changed my opinion of him. Previously I considered him a friend, but knowing how hard it must have been for him to call me out of the blue and say that, he's my brother, and I will gladly fight anyone that says different, just because we don't happen to share blood. My brother is doing fine now. I kept him talking until another brother got to his place and spent the night keeping him off the proverbial ledge. His doctor changed his medication the following day, and within a year he'd met a nice girl. Less than a decade later they have a son who is just his whole world. I don't know what my life would be like today if I'd received a very different phone call the following day instead. In truth, I'd rather not think about. Someone who I considered one of my best friends refused to cut off with my ex, who spent the better part of 5 years beating the shit out of me almost daily and raping me about every other day because he was her friend too. He'd never done anything wrong to her, and there are two sides to every story, apparently. Even worse, bearing in mind that his side to the story was that Since I have OCD, I'm nuts and basically imagined the whole thing. What is something you or someone you know has done just to watch the world burn? I was a troublemaker in high school. I would steal all the doorstops. Like, all of them, every day. It got to the point where the principal told teachers they need to stand out by the door in between classes and guard the doorstops. They even started numbering them. I still managed to steal them though. I must have stolen 50 plus doorstops in an operation that I called Operation Chaos. This operation also included me dumping 5,000 BBs in the hallways, dumping a gallon of mixed cheap cologne in a big hallway that forced them to actually shut it down. I would put Vaseline on doorknobs, throw glitter up in the air during class changes, and I bred 50 plus mice and planned to let them loose with the help of friends. My favorite though was carrying around a screwdriver and loosening screws. I wouldn't unscrew them all the way because I would get noticed. I would unscrew them a little bit every day on anything I could. So then about a week or so later, it seemed as though all these chairs and desks were randomly falling apart. Before homecoming I printed out a whole bunch of flyers that I stuck on billboards all around the school. These flyers were banning the students from doing the dance the Wellington. There was no dance called the Wellington, but it sure got the school talking about this forbidden mystery dance. I was later expelled. Singapore is a weird place. It is an especially weird place for an American teen. An even weirder time when our classmate was arrested at our school and was caned. Well, Singaporeans tend to be reserved, not outgoing. We Americans were generally more outgoing. And sometimes, we used it to make Singaporeans uncomfortable. For example, the bus stop was about 1/2 mile from my house. On the way, we had to walk by a big house with a few guards. My friend was with me and told me the Prime Minister lived there. Again, a really small country. So, we walk up to the guards and started to shake their hand and just started talking to them. They were so flustered and confused. Because no one has ever done that. We weren't threatening anyone. It was just us two. We were really friendly. It was the middle of the day. We were just 16. And we posed no threat. It's a normal neighborhood after all, and we had backpacks on and school uniforms. After about 3 minutes, they were extremely nervous because they weren't trained for this. Seeing a trained guard meant to handle threats, not having any idea what to do with people being friendly to him, was unbelievably hilarious to us. We had our fun and left. I worked as a camp counselor for a long time, and when I was supervising a big area alone I'd bring all my water guns. I hate participating in water fights, but I love watching them. My favorite thing to do is give a water gun to one kid and encourage them to be as obnoxious as possible, watching while everybody else in the area grows to slowly hate them. Then I'll start passing them out to other obnoxious kids and build my own little squad of terror. But the real fun comes when I engineer their demise by slowly arming a resistance against them. Brother begins turning on brother, and I watch like Caligula atop my tall rock, dry and sipping bug juice. The goal is to have a full-on war break out by the time someone else is supposed to take over for me. I built a dummy when I was 10 or so. My friends and I would stand in the front yard with it, wait until a car came by, and then beat the shit out of it. We'd tear his head off, or lynch him, or throw him in the street. He was about our size too, so people usually thought we were beating up another kid. They'd slam on the brakes and get out of the car to chew us out. One time we attached his hands to the second-story windowsill, so it looked like he was hanging on 4D life and some lady called 911. That was the end of that. Most of the guys on the team I work with are quite overweight and have different opinions on weight loss. They also love being right. It's pretty simple to say, does insert food here make you insert random weight loss / gain symptom here, and then wait for the argument to explode. Put my headphones back on whilst they argue. I'm a security guard with keys to everything. However, this doesn't need keys. Sometimes I'll lock and unlock the glass doors electronically. If it's an old woman, they go through. If it's some punk kid or any number of my criteria to be annoyed, they have to try more than once. Sometimes I'll lock 2 doors next to each other. They try one, try the other. I unlock the first one they tried, and they try it again and it opens. Most people really don't know what to think. Also, I'll lock a door and a person can't open it. They see someone go through the door 10 feet away. I'll lock that one and unlock the first door they tried. Also, if I'm really bored, I'll turn the push/pull signs around. I'm a dick and I'm sorry. I don't mess with the old, prego, sick, or disabled. If you are carrying a skateboard into the building, prepare to have trouble with the door. In middle school, we would have a bathroom break right after lunch every day. When we went to do our business, a kid in my class started laughing maniacally while pissing in one of the urinals and proceeded to aim his piss into the corner of the bathroom. He kept laughing as his piss covered the floor, and for some fucking reason 3 other kids started to do the same thing. By the time they were finished, there was a yellow piss pool covering about a third of the floor space. That would have been bad enough, but then the 4 of them started to jump around and splash people. Fuck kids. 2 days ago, I was in a very long line at a pharmacy, immediately in back of a very obviously strung out couple who were in the process of counting all of their change right there on the counter in the hopes that they would have enough for a pack of cigarettes. The line was ridiculous, extending all the way to the back of the store, and everyone was furious. This lady only had nickels and dimes for some reason, and was counting each one really slowly. She lost count and asked the clerk how much she had, and he said, $6.50. The cigarettes were $11.75. We all thought it was over, but then the guy she was with reached into his pockets and, over the course of what must have been a full 5 to 10 minutes, slowly counted out all of his nickels and dimes. When he was done, he asked for the cigarettes, and the clerk said, "You're $1.35 short." The guy said, No, it's all there," and the clerk said, "Nope, you're short $1.35. The dude angrily began to gather his change back, and the line behind us got so mad, because what the fuck all that for nothing, and B, began to clap with this super intense high Schadenfreude, like in sync and en masse. I looked over the faces of the crowd and then said, "Hey man, do you need $1.35? And the Schadenfreude, Reddit. The whole line was so furious about my sponsorship of this obnoxious couple and just like helplessly watching me cannonball right into their puddle of collective vindication. Oh my god. So I gave the lady the $1.35 and the clapping stopped, and there was just silence, like dead silence, while I went up to the counter and asked if it would be alright if I paid in change, and now everyone knows that when they pray it is me they are praying to. I have 2 really shirty roommates. Won't clean, use my shit all the time, play music and video games really loud until 4 a.m. sometimes. Anyway, I like to fuck with them a lot by doing little things to annoy them. For instance, one of them is really short, and I'm 6 feet 4 inches, so sometimes I put shit that he uses a lot on really high shelves, or places where he can't see them. One of them is constantly playing my Xbox on my TV, even when I want to play. So one time, before I went out of town for the weekend, I put clear tape over the CD drive so it couldn't open, and it actually really looked like this box broke. So that was fun. When I came back it magically worked perfectly. Just little things to annoy them until I can get the fuck out of there. One time I did something to watch the world burn and it completely backfired in my face. It was the worst prank in the history of my life. I was a dumb child. I got super glue, and I went around my house gluing down things that I thought people would rarely use. Top shelf picture frame, old scarf in mom's bottom drawer, dictionary on bookshelf, etc. About 20 things in total. I thought that people would come across these things over the course of months, that they would become confused and not understand how it kept happening. It was going to be my secret glory. My mom came across every single item in the course of a day. She cleans the house a lot more often than I anticipated. It was bad. Real bad. I stole an entire place setting from the old spaghetti factory, one piece at a time. A salad plate, dinner plate, bowl, glass, spoon, fork, knife, even a bread knife. It took months. Then one day I went there for dinner with everything in a messenger bag, and right before I left I set it up on the table. My daughter has amazing hand/eye coordination and can throw with scary accuracy. We are a family that loses our shit when people in movie theaters talk/text/make noise, etc. Some dude a few rows ahead kept pulling out his phone to check FB during the movie. I dared my daughter to throw a milk dud at his phone, and she hit it each time he pulled it out. Finally, he stopped. Then he put his feet up on the seat ahead of him where another person was sitting, so she started pelting his foot. Eventually he sat like a perfect gentleman with nary a movement or phone check. Near the end of a school year, I found a stash of permanent markers in the staff room of the elementary school in which I taught. This school required all students to remove outdoor footwear and place them on shelves near the exits. On the last day of school, I put a gift marker in each shoe. After school, I relaxed on the playground and watched. At any instant, I could see all stages of the prank play out, the surprise discovery, the opening and testing of the pen, the tentative line drawn on the stair rail, and the expanding cloud of graffiti spreading out from each doorway. I don't mean to be that kind of jerk, but when I was 17 I decided to go buy some groceries at a Giant or something. As I walked around I saw some very strict looking moms, and I had the brilliant idea of putting some random unhealthy foods in their shopping carts, unnoticed, and let the kids take the blame, and see what the moms would do. These moms, I could hear them from 2 aisles away yelling at their children as they all denied putting the 6 packs of chocolate pudding or 2 packs of Mountain Dew or 4 boxes of Lucky Charms in the shopping cart. Take a piece of paper and spread a thin layer of corn flour on the paper. Slide the piece of paper under a door, and then use a can of compressed air to blow the corn flour off the paper and onto everything on the other side of the door. The person who enters the room will find a thin layer of the powder coating quite a bit of the room. When they go to clean it up, they will inevitably use a damp cloth, and that is when the magic occurs. If you've ever played with corn flour and water, you know it becomes a non-Newtonian fluid, and those properties make it a nightmare to clean up. When you apply pressure, it's this stubborn goopy solid mass on the wall, but then you release the pressure, and it starts to freely run down the wall like a liquid. In 4th grade I created a club called the Safety Patrol Busters. I'm not sure how common Safety Patrol kids are, or if it's still done. But they were kids who volunteered to make sure other kids weren't doing anything unsafe, like running. If they caught you running, they'd yell at you to stop and go back and walk. During recess, me and the other boys in the club would seek out the Safety Patrol kids in their orange vests and run as fast as we could past them. When they yelled stop, we'd keep running. This would usually cause them to give chase. We had this secret hiding spot underneath the portable classroom, trailers, buildings where we'd hide out and watch them try to find us. They never caught the Safety Patrol Busters, ever. A guy was being a royal prick to me and everyone around him, just a loud doucher bag. It was at a local resale store, and I was holding this old 90s VHS video recorder, and when he saw it, he went apeshit over wanting it so bad. He even tried to take it out of my hands at one point, which almost got his ass kicked 6 ways to Sunday. Well, I didn't really even want it, but I paid $20 for it. This guy wanted it so badly he followed me outside and offered me something like $40, and that I would be stupid not to take it. I didn't say a goddamn word. I stared his ass down for around 5 seconds before walking up to the dumpster by the side of the building, and just with all my force and all my might I spiked that fucking VHS down into the empty metal dumpster. It hit with such force lots of little plastic and metal bits came flying up, and that recorder was fucked. The look on his face made it so worth it. I started laughing hysterically all the way to my car, and as I was driving away he was still just open-mouthed staring at me. I lost my voice the next day from laughing for so long and so hard. In my 8th grade English class, we occasionally critiqued each other's assignments by leaving a comment on the back and then passing it to the person next to us until everyone had reviewed each paper. One day I decided to write I3 Brandon I'm Brandon on every single paper. Eventually, my teacher noticed and got really upset that someone wasn't taking the task seriously. She instantly accused my girlfriend, who happened to be in the class and was always doodling girly shit on her binder instead of paying attention. My girlfriend, full of adolescent emotions, erupted into tears while proclaiming her innocence. After a moment, my girlfriend's tears of embarrassment turned into tears of rage when she realized that if she hadn't written the message, another girl probably had. She got up out of her chair and started yelling and pointing at another girl, accusing her of trying to break us up. The other girl denied doing it and then started firing vulgar insults back at my girlfriend. At this point, everyone in the class is yelling and cheering on the verbal slugfest until, eventually, my teacher got everyone under control. Needless to say, I could have stopped the ordeal at any moment. I still smile just thinking about it. I work at Disney World, that's the one in Florida. I found a list of the phone numbers to all the rides at Disneyland, California. I used to dial the Dumbo ride in Florida, and then before they answered, conference to the Dumbo ride in California. Both would answer, Dumbo, this is so and so, and I'd just sit on mute listening to them trying to figure out who the real so and so working at Dumbo was. No one ever said, wait, are you in FL or CAP? What is the worst case of special snowflake syndrome you have ever seen? I was training a girl in fast food, handed her a cleaning cloth, and she immediately hands it back. Oh, sorry, I don't actually do any cleaning. She didn't last long. Used to have a job in the entertainment industry, where I dealt with a lot of celebrities. Justin Bieber was such a cunt. He would only talk through his security. I literally had a full conversation with him through his muscle. Cunt cunt cunt. I was in charge of line wrangling for an event, a free event I might add, when a woman comes up to one of my security staff and explains that her son is autistic and freaking out because he saw someone cut in line and can't deal with it. The security guy explains he's sorry, but they can't be everywhere at every place. But my son is autistic. So the security guy comes to Central and asks how to handle it. The woman is real mad we don't have a way to keep people from cutting in line. But no one witnessed it, except the parent and the kid. And when asked to point them out, says I don't know, one of those girls. Pointing to a group of teenagers. When asked what we should do about it, she said to throw them all out. No, lady, we are not going to do that. So we got accused of hating and segregating autistic kids. But that's as far as she took it, a public admonishment. This girl wants/needs a really good recommendation letter for her upcoming grad school application and comes to me begging for an internship at my company. We don't normally have interns, but we create an internship position specifically for her. After working for us for 2 weeks, we offer to pay her for the internship, even though it isn't legally required in this country. She takes 2 weeks, during which time she's working, to come up with a vague guesstimate of what she'd like to be paid. She asks for a starting hourly rate more than twice what her manager is being paid. She takes another week to agree to be paid something reasonable, but high for a college student. She wants to get paid for the whole 5 weeks she's been with us, even though she was asked to keep a clear timesheet and didn't. While we are still discussing this, she refuses to run a simple errand because it's not the sort of thing she expected to be doing when coming to work for a company like this in the internship position that was specifically created for her on the grounds that it would be nothing more than gopher with a title. We would have fired her, but before we got the chance she sent in a resignation letter as a PDF and Pink Comics ends with my name spelled wrong. Really hoping she still asks for that recommendation letter. I work for a hotel, and we had a guy who came in twice a year or so. He claimed to be someone important in the music/recording industry. He would pull up in a nice town car, stay in a nice suite, and generally make sure everyone knew he was supposed to be some kind of big deal. He would tell the doorman and front desk to be very discreet if some music celebrity showed up to see him. He would tell the phone operators to hold all his calls, except if Beyonce's people call. Things like that. Only problem is, no one ever showed up for him. No one ever called. He would have his suite set up with conference tables and amenities for big meetings that no one ever showed up for. We googled him and couldn't find anything about him. So we figure he likes to pretend to be some big shot for his vacations. Pretty sad. The girl who was the ex-girlfriend of my ex-boyfriend's little brother. She was always talking about how hard her life was, how get parents treated her, etc. Now, this wasn't the problem. I was fine with her venting. But every time you started to talk about something else, she would try to steer the conversation back to her. One time I was talking about how much fun I had playing paintball and she immediately chimed in, stating that she preferred dagger fighting and wouldn't stop talking about it. She also believed in ghosts and thought she was something better because she was in some kind of VIP fan group of a band I was into a couple of years back. And she would lie constantly, stating that she wrote song texts for said band. Basically, she had the intelligence of 20 meters of field path, the charisma of a piece of toast, and looked like a cross between a mole and a dead fish stuck in some random gothic cloths, and still thought she was a hot piece of ass. I'm glad I finally have a name to put to the illness that affects a lot of the military wives in my area. I work at a library beside the base and have to deal with a lot of wives to admirals, captains, SEALs, etc. A military wife came in trying to check out books on a card that had an existing fine of $140 of late fees and processing fees. She handed me her civilian ID and said that her military status should excuse it. I laughed and said, sorry, we only take cash or check, not husband's ranks. Edit. I just left work and had a lady get pissed off because she couldn't reserve the meeting room that has been in the books as reserved for months for Fall Fest. Apparently, she didn't like it and said we would have a bunch of Navy wives calling in and complaining to our boss. I told her, ma'am, we have 10 other branches that will be happy to help you out. There was one I saw on Tumblr, a girl who basically identifies as some kind of animal. She was lamenting how for her, as a hamster kin or some shit, it was okay, but at Halloween her friend who identified as a cat must really struggle and be offended by all the people who dress up as cats. Up and called it a form of blackface. I have to believe it was satire or someone trolling, but if it's real I might punch someone. A friend's brother has the worst case of special snowflake syndrome I have ever witnessed. He periodically refers to himself as a demon / the devil, posts endless selfies of himself with OMG so ugly no wonder rhyme single, in order to get compliments from fat chicks, does the super edgy angry atheist thing constantly, but that's not even the worst. No, the worst special snowflake thing this chode does. He quotes himself on Facebook. He will seriously post something that he thinks is brilliantly clever and then attribute it to himself. I'm not even joking. One time it looked like this. This douchebag got a motherfucker. This douchebag. He quoted himself saying got a motherfucker like it was some brilliant statement. Why? Here's a story about how a mother is unaware that she's raising the spawn of Satan, as told by a swim instructor. For 3 weeks, this kid in my swimming class was being a brat, spitefully doing the opposite of what he was told to do. He would jump into the pool when he was supposed to sit on the wall, splash other kids in face, basically do everything he was told not to, like borderline odd. You could see it in his face, how he reacted with anger when being told not to do something. The expression was, how dare you tell me not to splash kid water in your face? I finally made him sit on the bench in timeout, which is usually the last time a misbehaving 6-year-old tries to get away with running the show. Well, this one came back in, jumped into the pool, not allowed, then lined up a kick straight back into my chest. He missed the first kick, and by the time I realized what this kid was actually trying to do, he re-aimed and hit me square in the sternum. Now, I'm 6 feet 1 inch, 200 lbs. I've worked with kids for my entire life. My default is to be the least threatening / imposing person I can be, out of necessity. You have to be a complete non-threat, or else the youngest kids will not even give class a chance. We call it boy trouble. But in this one case, for the first and only time in my life, I had to physically restrain a kid. I squeezed his arms to his sides and lifted him straight up out of the pool. He tried to kick me again, while looking right in my face. I walked right to the door, called his mother, and called for my supervisor to bring his towel to the door. He was goddamn leaving the pool, no matter what mom or anyone else says. We have CCTV cameras in the pool now, so I was particularly confident in case this mother went into denial / accusal mode. Some moms can't handle being told their kids are not perfect, let alone little sociopaths. His mom stares, gives a blank stare as I explained to her the sequence of events. This is not the first time I've spoken to her about behavior. Upon being told her boy struck me, her response was, that doesn't sound like him. Maybe he just doesn't respond to you. Meanwhile, and I swear to everything you hold dear, that this is true, this little tyrant walked over to his little brother, grabbed his head, and pressed his thumbs in his brother's eyes. The mother breaks away to ask him to stop. Not tell, not reprimand. Ask. She asked her son to not attack her other son. She turns back and implies that his misbehavior is my fault and her son had no problems with his old teacher. I remember once in school I was talking with a friend in class about a video game. The girl next to him said that when she was young she witnessed a shooting and would prefer I not talk about things like that in front of her because it brings back those memories. I explained the game I was referring to was Diablo II and that there aren't any guns in that game. She decides that this doesn't matter and that since she associates video games with guns I still shouldn't talk about it in front of her. I didn't know what to say to that, so after a few minutes of silence I brushed off my befuddlement and started talking to my friend again about Diablo. So she got up and moved desks, which she should have done in the first place right before not butting into my conversion. A girl I knew in high school thought everything in the world revolved around her, that her problems were the worst in the world and everyone should cry for her when she broke a nail. This became most evident when a few of us were chatting about life, and this girl went on and on about how sad she was because a new guy at school hadn't approached her and asked her out, even though she totally walked by his locker, and how come he didn't notice her. A moment later, one of the other girls opened up about how her parents had been fighting a lot lately and she was really scared that they were going to get divorced and she felt like it was partly her fault and she was crying herself to sleep every night because she couldn't take the guilt of her parents' breakup. Before I could respond, the special snowflake gave her a condescending smile and said, "Well, I think my heart hurts worse." I'm a third generation sheet metal worker. I had a guy, first day on my job site, refused to carry some 18-inch round pipe up 3 flights of stairs. He was black and claimed I was being a racist and that he doesn't do donkey work. Once he said that, I flipped my shit. My grandfather, father and myself had been doing this our whole lives and have never once been a fucking donkey. I laid him off the next day. Great feeling. Worked in an airport. Had passengers come and ask me why they didn't get a call to go through security. They were just waiting outside for the company to call each and every passenger from a 747 for boarding. At the busiest time of the day, 4 to 5 hours of planes taking off every 10 minutes. In 2 years I got that one 3 or 4 times. Sometimes after departure time. Student athletes in college. Every single one of them that I run into on a daily basis believes that they should be treated specially just because they can run fast or throw a ball. They feel that they can do whatever they want, whenever they want to do it. I didn't turn in my work. No problem. The teacher should pass me anyway so that I can play. I blatantly cheated on assignments. Who cares? I just did it so that I could pass without having to study. Oh, I'm being a disruptive arsehole in class? Not my problem. Everything revolves around me. It sickens me to the point where it makes me hate all athletes and all sports. And yes, I know that student athletes are not the only students that act this way, and that not all athletes are like this, but the vast majority of the ones that I deal with are like this. Got into a convo with a girl claiming the genetic lottery and being a perfect specimen for all mankind, while simultaneously being extremely shallow and stating she'll marry rich and never have to work. I've posted it before, but it applies perfectly here. I sat behind the human embodiment of Tumblr special snowflake in a microbiology class. I don't know if she suffered from Tourette Forutis or what, but some of her greatest hits include invading people's personal space and softly growling, disrupting lectures with anecdotes completely unrelated to microbiology. For example, she interrupted our professor discussing necrotizing fasciitis to talk about her fanfiction, began wearing cat ears and this tail thing, and meowing at people, wore a bazillion bracelets on each arm because they cover up all my scars. People can't handle me. Licked a petri dish that had strep culturing and then claimed she got cancer. She also smelled like she had never bathed or showered. A musty, nauseating aroma of rancid vag and unwashed ass. When confronted about her weirdness, or when told to knock her behavior off, she would start breathing hard and saying, What happened that made you instantly cut off your family? Less than half an hour after my mother died, my great aunt told me I had no right to be in the room with her body because I'm a drama queen who never truly loved my mom. I was 15 years old. That's not something you say to a kid who lost a parent. I'm way better off without that toxicity. I'm lonely, but safe. Posted on another post. Serving in Iraq. Family didn't bother telling me my mother had died. Found out via an email 2 weeks after funeral. Time I got home, they had divided all of her possessions. I got a brown envelope with 4 pictures of her in there. Got up and left. Never went back. Married a girl from overseas. Try to get her a visa. My aunt finds out. Sends letter to embassy stating that I'm an unsavory character and that the marriage was most likely a scam. Visa denied. I'm now leaving the country. I haven't talked to my mom in over 9 years now. It sucks, but I've been much happier ever since I made that decision. When I was growing up, she was always the type that instead of providing any sort of encouragement, she would embarrass you as motivation. She would point at homeless people and say that's what I would become if I didn't work hard enough. I remember when I was playing piano, she would tell all her friends that she wanted me to know how to play so I could at least play on the streets for money. When I had a recital at school, there was a piece that I kind of blanked out on, so I had to do that thing where you backtrack in the song and play it really quick to remember the song. It was obvious that I messed up though. Afterwards, my mom told me she was so embarrassed that she wanted to leave. The breaking point is, when I was trying to apply for dental school, I was having a hard time with the DATS, the conversion for dentist, and I had just taken it and got a bad score. I came home not feeling so great and my mom asked me how I did. I told her not that well, and she looked at me and said, "See, I knew you couldn't do it." She forced me to sign up for it again, and lo and behold, I did poorly again. This time I wanted to just avoid any contact with my mom, so I made sure to leave the house before she woke up and came home after she went to bed. During this time I had gotten a speeding ticket, but I paid it off in secret. What I didn't realize is that a bunch of driving schools will mail you brochures to take their course to get the points off your license. My mom found out and she called me immediately. What my mom didn't know is that I was in the car with all my friends and I put her on speaker when she started screaming, "What are you doing with your life? Just drop out of school and bag groceries. Stop wasting everybody's time." Ever since that day I decided to just not talk to my mom. There's actually a bunch more to the story, but fast forward 9 years and I've completed dental school, and in my last year of orthodontic residency, I hear from her co-workers how often she brags about my accomplishments and how proud she is of me. Some part of me wishes our relationship was better, but I always go back to thinking that it was too little too late. I didn't totally cut them off, but I moved across the continent and refused to visit. My mom said that if I wasn't her child she would want nothing to do with me, so I don't initiate contact with her. I just don't see the point in maintaining a relationship where you don't want one. My grandmother casually mentioned that she hoped my sister had a miscarriage because the baby's father is Mexican American. I never saw or spoke to my grandmother again, and my nephew just turned 16. I don't speak with my mother. She allowed me to be abused by her boyfriend when I was little. She was messed up on pills. Whenever she left the house I'd beg her to take me with her, and she never did. I tried to form a bond in my adult life, but she kept bringing up the past when I told her not to, and then I cut all ties. My mum was a bitch. She was emotionally abusive and neglectful my whole life. She only had kids for the benefits. My brother was 18 months younger than me, but because he was taller she would often mix up our ages. She often mixed mine and my sister's names up. I hated her for years, but I finally cut her out when I was 19. My dad died from cancer just before my birthday. In an argument, when she tried to convince me my sister is a prostitute, she's not. My mum used my dad's recent death to try and hurt me. I walked out of her house and haven't seen her since. I'm 24 now, and when I meet new people I just tell them both my parents died. Because they barred me from even visiting after I came out to them. Among other things, they called me mentally ill. They said they were glad I wouldn't be having children. They said that God would punish me for my lifestyle choices, and they blamed me for making them respond like that. My mother is a drugged out, alcoholic, whoremonger that basically had zero positive impact on my life. Didn't have the courage to cut her out of my life. Fear of triggering another suicide attempt. 3 to date, until I had kids of my own. I love my children and they will not be witness to the same things I've seen. I feel no remorse. And anyone else living with such toxicity in their lives, there is no shame in cutting ties with family members. Protect yourselves and find a way out. Because a simple text from my father would send me into a full-blown anxiety attack. A message from my mother stresses me out, but not as badly. I shouldn't feel so unsafe from the people who are supposed to have been my biggest safety net, but I do feel unsafe, and I deserve better than that. I cut my father out of my life many years ago. I could write an entire book on all the fucked up shit he did. I'll summarize. He was physically / sexually / mentally abusive, a raging narcissist and drug abuser. He took anything and everything, and was mercifully absent for large chunks of my childhood. Here are some notable occurrences. He beat me with a removable cord for an electric skillet while his neighbor sat and watched. Then he smacked me in the face because, in his words, I didn't think the beating hurt you enough. My transgression? Talking back to my mom, she used to send us to his house when we acted out. He beat my stepmom with a metal studded belt in front of me and my younger half brothers. I don't remember why. One of my brothers found some kittens that seemed to have been abandoned and brought them home. My father got pissed for some reason and threw one of them against the wall and killed it. He drugged and raped my sister repeatedly. No, he was never reported to the police for these or any other incidents, and the statute of limitations has long since passed. My sister didn't tell me her story until a few months ago. I had no idea. I feel so guilty that I never saw the signs. She had a rough few years, but she's moved past it, so at least there's a happy ending. Parents divorced when I was 2 and my father was still pretty active in my life. His mother watched me while my mom worked till she had a stroke when I was 6. Shortly before that, he had gotten married to this vile woman who made it clear that I had no place in her family. Numerous things happened when I was left in their care. The worst among them was being forgotten all day in a pool, and had after around 8 to 12 hours my ginger ass was blistering and oozing. My skin is crawling thinking about how much pain I was in. This gave me a horrible case of agoraphobia which I still have to manage today. Despite literally have a legitimate fear of direct sunlight, my father would only take me fishing and berate me on my own interest. Comics, movies, art, and music. Why couldn't I be more like my brother who was chasing pussy and playing football? After a while I start to try to force distance between myself and my father. I stopped taking his calls, quit engaging with him. My half brother, who is no relation to him, only strengthened. When my mom and step-dad moved to California, they moved my grandmother out of the home that her husband, my grandfather, built and housed into a third-rate nursing home. Gave my childhood toys to his wife's grandson, classic TMNT, Legos, G.I. Joes, and sold everything else of value. She died in 2006. I was only told that the woman who helped raise me had died via my mother's younger sister, who was married to my father's best friend. We haven't talked since. He had a heart attack in December. Found out from my brother. He told me to sit down and made me promise not to cry. He went into his bedroom and pulled out my blue suitcase that says going to grandma's from my childhood days staying with Ma, and I started crying like a bitch. He told me to open it, and my TMNT toys were inside, broken, mangled and destroyed, but I have them now. They're put up for safekeeping. My brother told me that after the heart attack, my father's wife decided to start spring cleaning, and my brother pulled this from the garbage. So, my father wasn't physically abusive, but he fucked over everyone in his family, keeping his cunt of a wife happy. My parents were drug addicts my entire life. My father is a narcissist. I cut my mother off first, after she stole $5K from me. She odd. My father weaseled in again. I'm working on re-establishing my boundaries with him and limiting our time together. Sometimes your parents didn't do their best. I cut off my aunt, uncle, and two cousins on my dad's side of the family. I got sick of their bullshit. I don't have much family, so it was a big thing. The main reason I cut them off is because of all the bullshit lies they spread about me. They think they are better than everyone, so in order to make themselves look good, they have to make others look bad. They are terrible people and live in shit, so they have nothing good about them. My wife and I married fast, didn't have a wedding or anything, just went to the courthouse. The second they heard I was married, they heard from my dad. They had already made up a story how my wife was a stripper who whored on the side, and I only married her because I knocked her up. My wife was never a stripper. Well, for me she was. She never whored, and she definitely wasn't pregnant. They told everyone this story until we made a surprise visit when we were cutting through the state they live in. All of a sudden she never heard that story. They are the type of people who will only talk to you if they think they can get something from you for free. For example, when her father was still alive she never talked to him until her roof was leaking. Then she called him out of the blue and said she would fly him over 1400 miles if he fixes her roof. They weren't going to pay him, just fly him out there. Another thing they do, which is geared mainly at me. Their oldest son / my cousin is about a year younger than me. He is a lazy piece of shit. He still to this day, he is almost 30 now, has to be forced to take a shower. If you don't make him, he will go weeks without one. He doesn't want to do a damn thing. But they think he is the smartest person on earth. So they try to make me look like a terrible person. They would call the college I was going to at the time and tell them I was crazy and had a drinking problem, and I was probably drinking behind the school. Yeah, that never happened. When I was still working for a company, they would call there saying I cheated on my drug test or I was selling drugs at work. FYI, I have never done drugs in my life, or my personal favorite, that I worked on their car while on the clock, also never happened, and they demanded the car be replaced because I broke it. My dumbass cousin broke it. After I quit and started working for myself, they would spread false advertisement around saying I would steal your shit. They did this because I refused to work on their shit. It was just one thing after another. Well, I got tired of their shit and changed all law numbers, then got a lawyer for $250 just to threaten a lawsuit for slandering our name. They shut the fuck up after the cried saying, how could you do this to family? They also piss everyone off with their religious bullshit. They have been Mormon for years, but I swear the particular church they go to is a cult. If you're not Mormon, they will try and convert you. If you don't, they treat you like whale shit. Years later we still haven't talked to them and have no intention to. They don't know where I live. They know the state and that's it. And they know they are not welcome here. Now I have a kid on the way and I'm sure they are starting some new lies. But I don't care. They live on the other side of the country. My immediate family cut off pretty much every member of my father's side of the family, with the exception of 3 people. Several years back, while my father was dying, we desperately needed help. Some financial, but otherwise just emotional support. We were losing my father, but they didn't care. Some of them even went out of their way to screw us over. And when he was nearing death's door, one of the worst of them called us up, all worried about arranging my father's last rites. First off, everyone knew my father was not religious and didn't want that. And second, you didn't give a damn about him before, but now you're worried about his immortal soul? Fuck off. We actually had to warn the care home about this relative potentially sneaking in a priest, and we also spoke with a close friend, who was a priest himself, who wrote said relative a letter that, politely, told him to fuck off. They can all rot for all I care. They made me ashamed to share the same last name. After they kicked me out age 17 for being not Catholic and not straight, wanted to get in contact again when I'd straightened out, got married and had a daughter. With the words, we will give the child the moral guidance you never could because of your demons. Never spoke to them again. No regrets at all. Much happier now. The father side of my family is full of extreme alcoholics, drug abusers, child molesters, and yes, as of recently, a murderer. I cut off contact with them years ago and chose to live my life without that kind of shit in my life or in my child's life. I don't have to see it, worry about it, waste resources trying to help them when they don't want to be helped, etc. I can go on living my life with the values, ethics, and morals that the other side of my family raised me with, live my own life, and build a successful socially contributive household of my own. And have done so.